You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
The Centresteer Podcast, a Land Rover podcast by Land Rover owners. This is the Centresteer Podcast, the first Land Rover podcast on the planet. Centresteer is a podcast by, for, and about Land Rover owners. Welcome to show number 62 for May 2018. I'm your host, John Costage, from the studio outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay, that has to be the
Easter egg. I'm not even cutting it out. I'm not cutting it out. I'm leaving it in. Joining me via Skype from Vermont is Morgan, representing SeriesParts.com. I'm just rolling. I'm rolling, brother. And also joining me from South Carolina is, I can't stop laughing, is Mike, representing JustBritish.com. Welcome, guys.
Good afternoon.
Harold was supposed to join us after the Indianapolis 500 race, and it's over, but he's not here, and I'm just laughing uncontrollably. Our guest this month is Bryan Joslin of Alloy and Grit magazine. We did an extensive review of his interview with Jerry McGovern. More on that later. Special thanks to our monthly Patreon subscribers. Your support really does help us, especially with domain management and website hosting. Visit patreon.com/Centresteer for all the details, or check out our website for a link. Thanks for your comments, follows, likes on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and emails. Nothing interesting to pull out about that. Maybe we should talk about the survey. I told the guys we're going to talk about the survey later, but why don't we talk about the survey now? So we had a survey open for a few months just to see what our listeners thought. We got 19 responses. Majority of our listeners that responded are from the United States. They're all male. We had no female respondents. A couple Australians. We had someone from Ireland. Norway. I think we know who that is. He's a listener in Norway. And believe it or not, one UK respondent. I was expecting a little more, I guess. And most are around our age. So I guess we're hitting the right target demographic ourselves. But thanks for taking the time to respond to the survey. It should help the show. At least from what I gathered from that, it sounds like we're on the right track, and we're talking about the things and in the ways that that resonate with you, the listeners. You know, we're not looking to change anything big and become, like a morning show, and that's not going to happen. But some interesting things to pull out here, some show ideas. Brandon Raby, Series 1 V8. Anybody know about that? So that somehow we can get in touch with him. Someone wanted to hear more about endurance rally events like the Camel Trophy, so we can check on that. Sean Jones at the Blue Ridge Rover Works. I think that's on our short list, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Someone wanted to hear, interested in interviews with some of the manufacturers and product suppliers. That's something we can look into, sure. Oh, talk to the folks behind Overland Expo and Overland Bound. I actually have not heard of Overland Bound.
Oh, really?
I learned.
It's a
great site.
Yeah, great site. Very, very large community and growing quite quickly. Founded by a guy out in California who's still running his, a 100 series Land Cruiser? I can't remember exactly which series it is, but yeah, he's a
large Land Rover community on there.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. And I believe that at one of the events, maybe last year, the founder, I had seen photos and video of him driving around in a Camel Trophy Defender. I don't know if it was an original or a repro, but he seemed to be enjoying it. So,
all right, well, it's on the list. Someone we want to get on the show. Which also goes to show you there's so much information out there anymore that it's tough to keep track of everything in all places. So thanks for another reason to have a survey to learn about things that weren't immediately on my radar. Mike Sandone from American Overland.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I met him at Vermont Overland Rally a few years ago, and I've seen him every number of years at British Invasion.
Well, your job now, Morgan, is
cool
to
projects.
Your job now, Morgan, is get him on the show.
Absolutely. I was hoping to catch him at Vermont Overland Rally last year, but he didn't make it.
Someone had said talk to some YouTubers, maybe Fun Rover. Well, Fun Rover is he's closing shop. It's actually for sale.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh, that's too bad.
Yeah, he's selling.
And we've had Ben on the show a number of times.
Yes, we have. He apparently is selling the domain, selling. I don't know if he's staying in Ireland or what he's doing, but I just saw on his site recently that it's all for sale.
Interesting. I'll have to reach out to him.
Yeah. I love this is a good one, and we should do this one. Someone's idea was fixing the three amigos.
That would be nice. I
Actually,
wonder who's. Yeah.
That would be a good one, I thought. Some general comments. The listener misses heritage. Hint, hint, Morgan.
Yes, we were actually discussing that pre-show. Got to get back into that.
Bring up the survey after folks listen to the podcast with a wink there. Yeah, exactly. Keep up the good work. Yes, I'm going to say all the positive thing. Pretty happy with the coverage. You guys are fine. Keep it up. Quite like them being 2 hours long. It means I'm 2 hours closer to finishing work when you guys are signing off. Do not shorten as a 21-year-old.
Help.
Do not shorten as a 21-year-old Land Rover owner, which is good to have young folks involved. By technicality, haven't driven either of the lightweight 101s we have because they're under restoration. It's great motivation and a source of information and news. Also nice to hear someone else talking about Landies for 2.5 hours. People who drive the modern cars are just as much Landy enthusiasts as those who drive the old ones. Yeah. I have to say that's true. I have to say that's definitely true. Hopefully we don't diss the modern folks. As I know we seem to be heritage focused, but we'll try to correct that. Although I can't speak for Harold. I've been listening since.
I think we know Harold. Yeah,
I think we know.
I don't think any of us will speak for him, but I think we know what's on his mind.
Yes, exactly.
On that topic,
right. Although pre-show we were discussing a good topic for the show, maybe, and actually that comment might bolster this. Should we have a conversation, like a deeper, kind of a deep dive, a discussion about, is there a modern Land Rover and is it distinct from the old Land Rover? And that means a bunch of different things. And if that is true, when did that happen and why? We're not going to talk about it now because that'll take us down a rabbit hole. But
we will start the news in 2.5 hours.
Yes.
if we start that now.
Start that right now. Another comment, I've been listening since the early days, which is that, I'm kind of shocked that's been a long time. Thank you for providing the podcast. It's been fun hearing the show expand, and covered a lot of great events, interviewed a very impressive group of people. Keep up the good work. Good stuff. You're interviewing important people who are doing important things. Keep it up. Good format and length, a good variety of content. And a final comment here, quality is getting much better. If you're finding a lot of folks aren't listening to the entire episode, maybe consider cutting it in half and dropping 2 episodes, maybe 2 times a month. No. Sorry. It's enough work.
Unfortunately means twice the work.
It does, actually. It does.
Hit pause for 2 weeks and then resume play.
There is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to make myself in particular sound good, because I cut out some of the bad things that I say, stutter around. I cut out at least half the show is Morgan saying and you know what I mean? That was a joke, Morgan.
I don't get what you mean.
Although you say a lot and that's your things. But I do cut out a lot of that stuff
and I greatly appreciate that.
Yes.
When I listen to the show, I'm like, who is that person? A lot more coherent than me.
I was editing our upcoming interview discussion that we had about McGovern article, and there's a couple times I'm like, I sound really crappy. Like, what was I saying? And then I trim it up, like, oh, I sound great. It was wonderful. I'm glad
Intelligence through editing.
Yes, that's exactly it. Thanks for filling out the survey. We're going to leave the survey open, and then at some point, Morgan will stop it popping up for you automatically, but it will for a short period of time. Morgan has been very busy with other things. If anytime you want to fill out the survey, go out to centresteer.com, and there will be a link to the survey. And now joining us late to the beginning of the show is Harold. Welcome, Harold.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How'd the race go?
Well, you just never know how it's going to go until it does, and then that's part of the magic of Indy.
It was on in the background while I was preparing for the show, and be some sort of crash or car failed to negotiate that curve, because they said the cars were different this year. Had to be one every 5 minutes. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it was a tough day for even numbered corners in Indianapolis. Just put it that way.
Who won?
Will Power.
I liked the opening part when you saw all the drivers and where they were from. I was surprised at a heavy presence of Australians and UK drivers.
Yeah, in fact, only recently has our country been represented better than it used to.
To celebrate the 70th anniversary of Land Rover, the Centresteer podcast is holding a giveaway. We want you to post a photo or short video of you toasting the Wilkes brothers on Instagram.
And if you don't know who the Wilkes brothers are, you don't deserve to win.
Sit in or stand near your Land Rover and say, "Thanks, Maurice and Spencer. Happy anniversary, Land Rover." Or words of your choosing. English language is not necessary. In fact, other languages are cool as it kind of, it fits with Land Rover's worldwide appeal. You don't have a Land Rover? Borrow a friend's. Get a toy model. Or maybe an alloy and grit photo. Put that in the background. This is the important part. Be sure to hashtag your Instagram post with hashtag WilkesToastLR70 and tag Centresteer and Alloy and Grit. The giveaway will run through September 7th, 2018. So that's going to give you the whole summer to get this done. When 3 winners will be randomly selected from all properly tagged posts, 2 winners will receive a 1-year subscription to Alloy and Grit. 1 winner will receive SNX 891 mugs and a mug and stickers. We'll contact the winners through Instagram, and we'll need your email and postal address to receive any winnings. Winners outside the U.S., hopefully shipping isn't too expensive if you win the mug, because mug is a little pricey, but we'll work with you there. So go out and check our website for the details. There we go. There's our 70th anniversary celebration toast to the Wilkes brothers and to Land Rover.
You have 3 months to put together something spectacular.
And now, the news. Jaguar Land Rover profits fall as sales slow. So JLR has reported a drop in profits after slower sales growth and rising business investment. Annual sales grew 1.7%, helped by strong demand in China. China was a bright spot. Their sales jumped 19.9% last year. North America was up 4.7%. UK sales dropped 12.8%, and European sales also fell, but they don't give a percentage. This is a BBC article. The UK sales drop can be blamed, as we've previously mentioned, on consumer uncertainty surrounding diesel models, Brexit, and vehicle taxation. JLR's chief executive, Ralph Spaeth, said, quote, "Strong demand in our key overseas markets has offset the challenging conditions in the UK and other parts of Europe. That heavy investment in new vehicles, manufacturing facilities, and next-generation automotive technologies will continue." In fact, there was another article that referenced that in China, as part of that investment push is coming at a time when China has announced it will cut its import duty on passenger cars to 15% from 25%. So that will grant foreign car makers greater access to the Chinese market, which is the largest in the world. And this all comes on the heels of announcing back last month that Land Rover is going to cut 1,000 contract staff at 2 UK factories because of Brexit and the changes in taxation and diesel cars. And then some breaking news, because this just happened. Michael, when did this happen? Just a couple days ago?
Well, it was announced or came public Friday. So 2 days ago.
Data breach at JLR reveals employee records and layoffs. Just the title alone, like, oh, come on. So there was a data breach revealed that records of hundreds of employees at the JLR factory in Solihull. The breach, which was first reported by the Huffington Post, includes employee names as well as personal issues such as sick days used, disciplinary issues. What is worse, the records are also flagged to indicate who might be sacked during the company's upcoming layoffs.
That's a shame. It sounds like all their HR data, which is the worst data to have leak, and those poor people.
It looks like, from everything I've been able to gain, that DHL, which over there runs all kinds of other operations,
supply chain,
not just like the shipping that we think of. It was probably a spreadsheet sent between them, and then somehow was made public. Like maybe somebody on the list made it public. Who knows? I don't know how it was made public.
Yeah, it was definitely an insider issue. It was not like the breach was not from the outside. It was an inside
No, it wasn't
issue,
one of those hacking things.
Yeah.
This was definitely somebody got a hold of a document they weren't supposed to get a hold of.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Much more of a leak than a breach.
Yes.
Right. And Jaguar Land Rover initially cried fake news, no, it didn't happen. And then it was like, well, here it is. Oh, yeah, well, it's their fault.
It's really embarrassing, but I mean, it would have to be an internal leak because hackers aren't going after that kind of stuff typically.
No.
You'd be surprised unless there was some other data along with it.
Well, if the hackers were going after it,
exactly.
most likely it would be in a raw format. The Huffington Post showed this is the spreadsheet, so it was a file. It looks to me, it looks like somebody disgruntled sent it out.
And a lot of things happen typically in that situation. They send it to the wrong person because the autocomplete in your email address, you chose the wrong Roger. Or it went to a distribution list.
Reply all instead of reply all.
You hit reply all, you forward it on to the wrong distribution list. Yeah, I've seen that stuff happen. And then there's always the, like you said, someone disgruntled who's like, don't want to see anybody laid off, but this is just crap. So anybody affected by this is just sorry to hear that.
Yeah, that's the worst way to find out.
Well, moving on from that bad news, JLR gains Jamal Hameedi, performance expert from Ford. So speed and performance expert Jamal Hameedi has left Ford Performance to become part of Jaguar Land Rover's SVO, according to his LinkedIn profile. Talking about information security again. His title is listed as Engineering Director SVO at Jaguar Land Rover.
Interesting.
He has been he has been Ford Performance Chief Engineer since 2013. He oversaw the development of the GT Supercar, Mustang Shelby GT 350, the F-150 Raptor, the Fiesta ST, the Focus ST, and the Focus RS. Although a great loss for Ford, this move will certainly win JLR SVO, and was a win for JLR SVO, and again signals the evolving visionary of the company. Vision. Oh, I can't read this. And Michael, you wrote this, and I can't read your own.
I'm just listening to you slaughter it.
Slaughter it. Yes. I'm not editing this one either.
Just another day here on Centresteer.
And I reached out to him based on his LinkedIn profile. Nice guy, and obviously he's already there and situated at JLR SVO. So it'll be interesting to see what he does.
Yeah,
the curious thing is how many people did he already know? Because Ford Performance and Jaguar were pretty closely linked, a decade ago.
Yeah. Well, it sounded like he was only there from 2013 or so, or at least in that position.
He had other positions there.
Yeah.
He'd been there a long time before that.
He probably rose up through the ranks.
Excellent. So yeah, hopefully he did have some contacts already going in, and hopefully it's a nice move up in terms of what he has the ability to do now. Obviously Ford is a very big company, so probably no shallow wallet there. JLR is working at a different level entirely in terms of the quality that they're shooting for.
Mind you, JLR has a lot to thank the deep wallet of Ford for, because they wouldn't be where they are today hadn't been for the massive ingestion of capital that Ford gave them 20 years ago.
Absolutely, and that little bump in reliability too.
More than a little. Point of clarification, Mike. You say here that it's a win for JLR SVO. Is that not specifically Land Rover SVO?
No.
Oh, I thought the special vehicles was just a Land Rover thing, and Jaguar called it something else.
It's the department. It's one of those weird corporate things.
It's
this
a corporate
is over
level.
both of them. Yeah.
Oh.
This is and I don't know if it's because the corporation as a whole is JLR or whether it's a more umbrella position over each one of them. But no, it's JLR's SVO.
Well, that's actually interesting.
And we'll cover the 70th anniversary broadcast later, but that was shot in the new SVO facilities, and there are very clearly a number of Jaguar vehicles in the background.
Oh yeah, you're right.
So it's a shared facility.
Okay.
Yeah, the two shops are very closely related.
Yeah, in the same way even the Jaguar Land Rover Classic shops are related. They don't separate those.
That makes sense now. Okay, it would make sense that there's probably their own SVOs, whatever you want to call them, for the individual marks, and then there's probably a corporate level one. And
especially when you talk about Harold's favorite thing, the shared platforms, that it makes sense that there's an umbrella over those.
You like to speak in irony, don't you?
Speaking of the Classic Works, JLR is expanding its Classic dealer network to Germany. On May 4, JLR officially opened a Classic Center in Essen, Germany. Similar to its facility created last year in England, this German site will be used to repair and sell vintage vehicles from the two companies' lineups. An online Works Legends list of JLR's Classics inventory has been created. The site currently only shows off vehicles available at the UK dealer, so selection is limited, but there are some rarities to be found. This includes a Land Rover Series 1 fire truck, Defender 6x6, and 3 Jaguar XJ 220s. According to the announcement on the site's opening, pre-owned Works Legends are specifically selected examples of classic Jaguars and Land Rovers. ranging from usable daily drivers to outstanding concours standard show cars or rare vehicles possessing unique historical significance. All have to pass a 125-point health check and are sold with a manufacturer-backed 12-month warranty. Programs from Porsche and Fiat Chrysler. JLR is dedicating resources to making sure its older vehicles get the love and care they deserve. The German plant will be used to manufacture parts for the vintage cars, repair them, and show them off for sale. The services offered at the facility range from simple inspection to full engine teardown and rebuilds. Classic Works is also offering storage options for customer vehicles, which include regular maintenance, ensuring the enthusiast car is always ready to start and drive.
Yeah, I didn't realize they were also doing the storage options now. That's an interesting service to offer.
I thought the part they were actually making parts, they were going to manufacture parts for vintage cars. I didn't realize they had that capability. I thought that was done, back in Solihull.
Well, this would be additional capacity for that then, wouldn't it?
Anything that keeps the older ones on the road, I'm all for.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And that's Germany is a good location for that. Obviously, it's got a lot of industry available to it, a lot of money, people who are interested in classic vehicles, but also very convenient for Europe as a second location.
Now, if the third would just be in the U.S.
And the other thing it does is it looking, bring that word up again, Brexit. We've got some manufacturing in the EC of these parts outside of the British, so it helps Europe in that way too.
That's a good point. There's very little, actually no, new Land Rover news, but we did find this story coming out of India, is that the Discovery Sport and the Range Rover Evoque get the Ingenium petrol engine. Pretty much the article, they give you the prices, but the all-new aluminum 2.0 Ingenium motor will consume 15% less fuel compared to the older 2-liter unit, being offered in a 200 horsepower, 250 horsepower, and 300 horsepower twin scroll turbo form. Coming to India.
Now, I wonder if India was getting or selling much of the petrol before that, or whether they are more of a diesel country. I'm not familiar with the demographics there.
Neither am I, and it doesn't seem to be mentioned in this article. This is from Autocar India.
Now, isn't India one of the countries that's facing phase-out legislation?
I will consult our list, Harold.
Okay, because I think that might be a posturing move if that's the case.
Banning internal combustion engines. India going electric only. Goal of no gas diesel sales by 2030. That's the headline from last year.
So it's not a close deadline, and so probably not a posturing move at this point. They're just trying to change the mix up a little bit.
That was Land Rover new car news. Moving on to non-Land Rover car news, because we thought this was relevant. Rolls-Royce unveils the Cullinan.
Nope.
Yep.
Cullinan.
Cullinan.
All right.
Yeah, Cullinan.
Thank you. Rolls-Royce unveils the Cullinan. And that is a reference to the crown jewels, the British crown jewels?
Yes. The largest diamond ever discovered, I think.
Yeah, there we go. So Rolls-Royce has a SUV, along with Bentley having an SUV, along with Porsche having an SUV, along with Volkswagen having an SUV, along with Mercedes having an SUV. I could go on.
Please don't.
Yeah, I'll stop now.
Hey, you could name every manufacturer on the planet at this point.
Does Aston Martin have one yet? Have they?
They're about to.
I thought so.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, Lotus is too.
Really?
Yes.
That's a shame.
And isn't Ferrari also? Didn't I? Some hints at Ferrari is also.
Morgan doesn't. Morgan, the car maker, doesn't.
Thank you.
They can't. There's not enough leather to strap the hood down.
But Morgan, the panelist, does. So.
It's true. I have several. For Morgan, I would be interested to see how they do a wooden frame SUV, but I would rather leave it to my imagination than actually.
Yeah, I'd rather they just didn't.
Yeah.
I'd rather just
on the other hand, that sliding dovetail front suspension might give them a fair amount of articulation off-road. Till it breaks.
Well, but then you're in the woods with the wood you need to repair it.
The suspension's not
wood.
Yeah.
You take a Bridgeport milling machine along with you, and you can make a new one.
Well, their waiting list is long enough that they do not need to add another model.
The Lotus SUV is going to be interesting.
They've got to be taking that from somebody else. And
question is, will it be made of plastic?
Yes, I believe carbon fiber. I think
run the backbone chassis in a plastic body.
There you go. The Land Rover started 70 years ago. It's come to fruition with everybody wanting an SUV and a super luxury one, I guess, apparently at that now with Rolls-Royce. So everybody's in the game. And then, of course, as we know, Ford is getting out of the car business in the U.S. And exclusively doing trucks and SUVs.
They're going to have one
That's where the
car
market
left. But pretty much.
Okay. You know what I meant. Come on.
But token.
The token.
Yes.
The whole point, but the point of that is the market has gone to trucks and SUVs. That's just a.
But it makes sense for Ford because that's what they do best, and it has been for decades.
Yeah, and again, that's only the U.S. They have a lot of vehicles outside the U.S., which will presumably
worldwide market
still remain. The one question on all the SUVs, though, is this Cullinan that comes with a twin-turbo V12. Do any of the others have the V12?
Yeah, V12s aren't as fashionable as they used to be. I still miss the Lamborghini V12 SUV.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Hey, it was a cool truck in its day.
It was, but...
And how many times did it win the Camel Trophy?
Hey, I understand it wasn't designed for the trail, but at the same time, how many times has a Defender gone 140 miles an hour in loose sand?
Well, if it fell off a cliff and went straight down, it might.
All righty then.
Well played. Land Rover's 70th anniversary broadcast was back on April 30th, which was the day after we recorded the last podcast. So we now know what has happened on that day. There was some
exactly what we didn't say was going to happen.
Yes, absolutely, exactly. There was no new Defender reveal. It was simply
not even a hint of one.
No,
I barely even mentioned that it was coming.
It was 37 minutes of the Land Rover cake. So it was all, fluff and good stuff. Now there were people in there
it was a well done show. I will tell you that.
I agree.
It was
very well done. A lot of the people that have been on this show were actually I saw in the program. You saw Tim Slessor and Mike Bishop. They were in there. That come immediately.
And yet you heard them on our show first,
right?
And you saw the Centresteer podcast sticker as part of the broadcast. If you knew where to look, you could see it and zoomed in.
I couldn't quite pick it out, so I'm glad you could see it.
That's nice. It wasn't. I wasn't going to waste my time looking for it. I know what it looks like.
Yeah,
it was nice to see the truck there, though.
The truck was there, and you knew the background story to seeing Tim Slessor talk and be in the snow and driving the truck. So you knew the whole background story of how that happened and when it happened.
And if you don't, go watch that video and then go listen to episode 61 again.
And there were a number of other vehicles that we've discussed or interviewed, especially recently. Mike Bishop discussed the early pre-production Series 1 that was at the Amsterdam Motor Show.
And his truck was there in the show if you saw
it. I saw AC360 in the shelving.
Shelving, yes.
260.
Oh, 260, yes.
And the Trans-Africa truck was there, but it was not just shown in the broadcast.
Correct.
And he took the truck, but he was in the audience.
And they had one of the pre-production Velar Range Rovers, the original Range Rovers. Nice eye candy.
The funny thing about that is my wife was watching the show, and she didn't quite know the story behind the Velar, so she kept asking me, what's this thing with this funny name on the front? It looks like a Land Rover, but it's got this other name.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many people got confused when they started talking about the Velar and how...
Right, the new Velar. There's this... there's the new Velar, and then there's this old one here that says Velar on the front. What's up?
Steve Cropley of Autocar in the UK had a nice article that was behind the scenes of Land Rover's 70th birthday event. He too, like us, said, quoting here, I'm here really because there were rumors there was going to be a sneak preview of the new Defender, but as soon as I put my nose in the door, I knew it wasn't going to be true. Too many of the great and good, not enough hacks. And if there had been big news, we'd have been tipped off. There's a Frisian as chief designer Jerry McGovern's favorite car is mentioned, but it turns out to be, surprise, the Velar, not the new Defender. The half hour is over in an apparent 10 minutes, which I do agree with him. That seems right. Yet even the cynics among us were left as a nice warm feeling about Land Rover, its achievements, and its place in the world. Chief engineer Nick Rogers signing off with a stirring, "We're only 70, we're still going young." But the most resonant words are Ralph Fiennes, "These are God's vehicles."
Yep.
It's certainly, it was well-produced, slick production, but if nothing else, it did certainly cement the status of all the important things that they've done in history.
It would have been nice, though. They could have taken, 30, almost 37 minutes. They could have taken another 2 minutes to say, we got something really cool coming. Even if they didn't show it, just mention that, yes, there's a new Defender coming.
Even mention it, they're still working on it.
Yeah. It's almost
like it's coming later.
Yeah, it's like they didn't even, like, that's like a big deal, especially for those of us.
Well, they made a big deal about the new Velar that's coming and that they've been working on. And I mean, that's great. Velars are cool, but it's not what we want to see.
It was nice to have them give a very good summary of the history of the vehicles and show them off to people who may not have actually seen them.
And they did include some folks around the world. I don't think enough. They should have done more of it, but folks around the world, clubs and people that were passionate about the brand. There was some of that, and it could have done, I think, a little more of that. I was hoping more than 3, if I recall. It wasn't more than that. You thought there would have been more.
I think there were maybe 6 or 7, but it still wasn't very many. The one thing that I thought was very interesting, and my girlfriend happened to sit down and watch part of it with me in the beginning, obviously all of the historic vehicles and the life-changing and history-making expeditions that occurred, they were all by men. And then about halfway through the broadcast, all of the new technology, it was all discussed and shown by women. So I thought that was really fascinating to see. And they did actually...
The women engineers. Yeah, that's right. You're right. A lot of the new tech was being showcased by women.
Yeah, and they did mention Barbara Toy in her original Series 1 expeditions, because she did sort of an around the world and then a later tour when she was in her 80s, I believe. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting to see that it started off with mostly men and mention of one woman, and then it pretty much flip-flopped. There was only one man in the second half of the engineering and technology side. The other thing that was pretty fascinating to me was they just sort of slipped in a comment that Land Rover has been working on and towards autonomous vehicles and driving specifically for quite some time. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, but they even sort of looked back at the Range Rover Classic and the automatic air suspension and some of those features as things that were working towards autonomous driving, because they were a portion of the vehicle's driving capabilities that somebody just didn't have to worry about. The vehicle just took care of that stuff for you.
Well, and the fact that you could actually operate a Land Rover with only one arm and one foot.
Absolutely. So, yeah, there was some interesting stuff slipped in there, but I think a lot of it was pretty subtle.
Well, they also glossed over, I think, the Range Rover being involved in Darien Gap, when we know the real story is that it was a Series 3 that actually made the Darien Gap crossing, and they just happened to have 2 new Range Rovers at the time, 1970, I think it was 70, 71, happened to be kind of at that point towed behind or following behind, but it ended up being a Series 3 they found in nearby and bought off a farmer, I believe, and they kind of glossed over that part.
I think they maybe did that deliberately to sort of broaden the family of vehicles that's done things of this nature.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, and let's also face it that Series 3 that they used was already pretty beat, so it was pretty much like just grabbing a tractor out of the field and not caring what you do to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
And in many ways, that's the best kind of Land Rover to have.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what happened next was, sorry, I was thinking of Adam, and we should go recover that truck. That truck actually should be recovered and restored. That would be the story truck more maybe than the Rangies that followed.
I'll add that to Adam's list.
The world's most confident man.
He's the guy that could make that happen.
I thought that one was actually destroyed, that they gave it to some official as a gift after they completed the trip, and then he promptly drove it into a building or something like that.
I seem to recall. Yeah, that's what happened.
That's exactly the kind of stuff that Adam specializes in.
True.
Stuff that you thought was gone. You thought it was destroyed, and guess what? Here it is.
Following on with the 70th anniversary, the Sunday Times out of the UK, out of London, had a nice article. Nothing new that any of us would have learned, but it's Land Rover's 70th birthday. Here's the British 4x4's remarkable story. And it's a nice short article, but it has all the things that you already knew in one place, that if you wish to use as a talking points for someone that you wish to explain Land Rover to and about, I think it's a good article for that. Such as you can actually imprint and show somebody. Land Rover story began with a stretch of a 4x4 inspired by the American Willys Jeep, and then they have a nice graphic, 70 years of Land Rover. It's a timeline. They have it as a graphic, and then they also have it just listed there, and it's better than going to Wikipedia and looking for a couple dates that maybe highlights that you want to look for. So nice little article. Again, if you want to brush up on your history, or if you wish to share with a new person who goes, "What's that thing? Is that a Range Rover?"
No, at least they're not asking if it's a Jeep or a Hummer, believe it or not.
I don't think I've ever had that.
My meat wagon has been confused for a Hummer.
Oh, okay.
On more than one occasion, which is mildly offensive. No disrespect to the Hummer, they're cool, but they're not the same thing.
Well, they're probably thinking of the Chevy version of those more than anything else.
No. The old coots going by. I drove Hummers just like that when I was in the service. No, you didn't.
Oh, look at this. 2014 SVO division is officially launched. I learned that from that article. Let's move on to events going on. And there's an event that just concluded in the UK. It was the inaugural Land Rover Legends Bicester Heritage.
Blister without the L.
Bicester. Land Rover Legends at Bicester Heritage. So there's a couple interesting things to read here. And actually, go out to their Twitter feed. We'll have a link to the site, and go out to their Twitter feed, which I think is LR Legends, if I remember right. And there's some nice pictures there. They had some competitions, and they had the results from that. But the very first Land Rover Legends show is well underway. This article was written on Saturday. We're recording on Sunday. The dubious weather failing to deter diehard land enthusiasts from getting up close with the Mark's most celebrated vehicles, a parade of early Solihull automotive icons, and talks with Campbell Trophy winners Joe and Bob Ives, alongside Tim Slessor of Oxford and Cambridge Expedition fame, wrapped up Saturday's action. TV's Mark Evans was live on stage with Joe, Bob, and Tim, alongside the drivers and custodians of Land Rover's famous Beaver Bullet Range Rover and pre-production L03, not to mention the Series 1 and Series 2 parade celebrating the oldest in Land Rover's heritage vehicles. The very first Land Rover Legends Awards will also be handed over to deserving victors at 3:30 p.m. Sunday, which is already past our time here while we're recording this, with trophies gifted to those with the most original Landy, best restored Land Rover, and best bespoke vehicle. A huge and diverse range of Land Rover models had entered the competition, including an all-original Freelander. One, you may guffaw, but original unmolested examples are seriously rare. That's reading from the article. That's not my comment. A seldom seen...
Depends on how you define original, too.
A seldom seen 50th anniversary Defender, and the most battered but ultimately cool Series 2 you'll ever set eyes on. So that was the inaugural Land Rover Legends show. That
was put on by Land Rover, or no?
No, I think we talked about this, I think, a month or so ago, because they announced it. And I think Land Rover hired an events coordinator, and I think they were related. I think
so it was sort of sponsored, but not something like that.
I think they were providing some of these older vehicles, like the pre-production vehicle. And they were, I think, providing some of the other vehicles, probably some G4s or some Camel Trophies they had in the background. And
yeah, because there's a lot of crossover between the vehicles and the people who were shown in the anniversary broadcast and that lineup.
Yes.
Yeah, the events that are done there are events on their own, but with sponsors like Jaguar Land Rover or Land Rover Monthly Magazine and the big insurance company over there, Footman James and all there, but they are actually their own events. There's a Land Rover Legends, there's an MG Legends, there's a Jaguar Legends event. There's a bunch of those different ones.
Very nice.
So they have a template.
Yeah, exactly.
Made this the Land Rover one. Okay, cool. They discovered a long-lost RAF Series 1, and it was set to come to the show, and this is kind of an interesting read here. Unique ex-services workhorse from 1952 will appear at the Mark's inaugural Bicester Heritage Show. Its first public display since its recent barn discovery. It's always, unique Land Rovers unearthed, little in Series 1. That's why enthusiasts have celebrated the discovery of a barn find XRAF Series 1 80-inch, and the very special model is set for Land Rover Legend Show. Discovered in a Gloucester barn where it's sat since 1979, the Landy is currently undergoing a rolling restoration. And while all the original paint has unfortunately already been removed, obliterating any telltale allusions to the 4x4's RAF history, the plan is to replicate a glider tow vehicle.
Really?
Yes. The incorrect...
Didn't think they'd go fast enough to get anything airborne. Unless it drives off the end of the cliff, pulling the plane with it.
The incorrect...
Only good for downhill runways.
Yeah. And one launch. Only one.
Well, at least it wasn't a Royal Navy tow glider plane, right? Tow glider truck. Off the end of the runway, whoop, into the drink.
Well, if it was an APGP, it might work.
Continuing, the incorrect lights through the grill usage is not due to the current custodian's personal taste, but rather is believed to be an ex-military defense replacement brought about through a lack of time to source an original, a situation which many Series 1 enthusiasts will be familiar. The rear floor is absent after the car's conversion to accommodate towing gliders for the combat cadet forces. Unusually, the RAF kept this Land Rover beyond the usual disposal period. A typical term of vehicle service is a little over 10 years. It was neglected for the best part of 40 years.
Does it say how long?
Neglected or preserved?
Right.
I leave it to you to decide.
I think that's fully debatable now.
Yes.
I mean, leaving it alone in a barn might not be the worst thing you could do for it.
If you were at the show and you got to see it, that's pretty cool. If not, take a look at the article. There's a nice picture. They did a nice job with the restoration, at least the visually that I saw. Go ahead, say it, Harold.
Another example of a Land Rover doing something important.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Got to get that in every episode. Another event.
Can I have my cookie now?
You may, indeed. Another event coming up in the United States is the Western National Land Rover Rally. This will take place September 13th through the 16th in Sierra Nevada, California. Looks like, and I was trying to get one of the folks to come talk about the show, but unfortunately we didn't get it organized in time for you listeners in North America. Start prepping your trucks. This is being organized by the Arizona Land Rovers Club, the Northern California Club, the High Desert Rovers, and the Great Basin Land Rover Club. So they're going to have that. And we're going to try to get someone to come on the podcast to talk about this rally.
Does it say where in the Sierra Nevadas it is?
It just says Sierra Nevada, California.
And this is the first year that those groups have gotten together to put this event on, or no?
That's why I was trying to get someone to come on the show to talk about it. I don't know.
And when? Did you say?
September 13th through the 16th. Registration will open May 1st and will be limited to the first 200 vehicles to sign up. Make plans now.
Interesting. It might be an opportunity to go see my wife.
There you are. That's right. Oh, yeah. How is that close to where she is?
Yeah, she lives in the foothills of the Sierras.
Oh, sweet. There you go. Oh, good.
I suspect it's the wrong side of the Sierras where the event is, but
well, it's
globally speaking, globally speaking, that's still pretty close.
Yes, I was about to say it's definitely closer than where we are now.
Hence the Land Rover, though.
Might be doable.
Another event coming up, and this is going to be a podcast meetup. So on Saturday, July 14th at Shenley Park here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or as I said earlier, Pennsylvania, which is French, by the way, for Pennsylvania, is the 38th annual British Car Day. Will be at the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix, which we've talked about a number of times. We've been talking over the past couple of months. Everybody on the podcast here is going to show up. Morgan's coming down, or at least that's the plan. Morgan's going to come down from Vermont. Mike's going to come up from South Carolina, and so we're going to have a podcast day also in addition to British Car Day. So
I guess I might show up too then.
I think it's time for, you can show up. So it's the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix, and they have a number of car shows, and they run all the other ones except for the British car shows, because that's run by the Western Pennsylvania Triumph Association, and because they've been having their car show longer than the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix has been going.
And in the true Shakespearean sense, it is the show within the show.
So come on out if you're in the area and want to come on. It's a free show unless you're having a car on site, and which is then for British Car Day, it's what, $25 I think to register. 30. It's now 30.
It's 30 and 40 at the door if you don't. You want to wait to see what starts.
Pre-registration prior to July 1 is $30. After that, it is $40. And we'll hang out under the awning of my Defender.
Yeah, there's probably room for the entire crowd there.
I think so, yes. That awning.
Ridiculous awning that it is.
Yeah, I guess we'll give you a little bit of give our listeners an update on my Defender rebuild. It's in shakedown cruise mode, and I've taken it out last couple weekends to different things and done different things with it to shakedown cruise. We had... The first weekend we took with Harold was in the truck, then the starter stopped starting. So we had to do bump starts.
It either stopped starting or started stopping, depending on your frame of reference.
True.
So John had to learn how to bump start, or at least practice his bump starting.
I did, and I actually had to bump start it in reverse, which was novel. I don't think I had ever bump started any vehicle in reverse before. and it did it in this one. So it worked out. We were okay. We ended up making it there and back. That first trip, Harold, was a perfect trip because it was in multiple conditions, long distance. It was sunny, and then it rained, and it was daytime, then nighttime, and we were on the surface streets, and then we were on the interstate, and we were in the city, then we were in the country, and so there was a bunch of different things happened, and which was good. The rear wiper came on and wouldn't go off, which was fun.
That's a reversal for a Land Rover as well.
It was exactly it.
That's only because it was the failure of the parking switch, not the main switch.
Okay.
So yeah, it turned on just fine. Just didn't. Yeah. And the interesting thing is that playing around with it later, it would not park if the engine was running. Shut the engine off, it parks just fine. Go figure that one out. That's kind of a head scratch.
Couple more things for it to be completely finished. They anticipate to have it fully ready for the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix on British Car Day. So if you want to see it in all its glory, and it is glorious, I might add, feel free to come on out to the show and then see all the podcast guys too. We'll give you a sticker or something. Mike, you got to bring
just British sticker. Yeah. There'll be just British stickers there.
Wonderful.
Just come and look for the Oxford Blue 110 with the ridiculous awning.
With the ridiculous. Oh, that's right. I want to tell you about the ridiculous awning. So then the next weekend after that, I took a camping trip. Again, another good opportunity. That trip, no problems at all. On the highway, camped fine. I even slept in the vehicle, which was nice. Worked out well. Deployed the awning, and it's massive. I know, it's just huge. It's nice, but it's huge.
And which one is that again? It's one of the 270-degree awnings, right?
It is, yeah.
Technically, it's a double 270. It's 540 degrees of rotation.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice. Two sets of arms that rotate through 270, so it surrounds three sides of the vehicle.
So does it look roughly like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang with the wings out?
Yes, if you mounted it sideways on, yeah.
Okay.
We could put one on both sides, and then you would get that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I see. Well, I look forward to seeing it. Yeah. And I'm glad you now know how to bump start it.
Bump starting was not the issue. It was the bump starting in reverse in a busy street. Car was making a noise, and so kind of couldn't immediately pull over because it was too busy.
That was the point at which the starter remained permanently engaged to the engine and was spinning around whether we wanted it to or not. Right. That's where we had to stop for that one and get it disengaged.
We were on a busy state road, and there's no berm, nothing you couldn't pull off. And in the next road, I just turned to the right. And thankfully, it was a residential area, and it was like a parking lane, and so I pulled into that, perfect. And then it was at a traffic light, and man, there was a stream of like 15 cars like every minute. So we once figured out what was going on, like, all right, disconnected the starter, and we'll have to bump start it to get it moving. Had to go in reverse, and then had to wait a minute for there to be a clear space in the traffic, and bumped. And it wasn't even 10 feet. I think it started right up.
Nice.
So there you go. Come on out to the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix.
Yeah, we see the big awning. You might even get a bump starting demonstration.
And another event that just came up, and I thought we'd tell you about. Not many people were aware of it, but this is a fundraiser to bring the Oxford truck to the United States. And this is the first kind of fundraiser to do that. And a couple clubs in the United States are coming together, especially on the East Coast. And that is the Fort Pitt Land Rover Group, which is Harold and I, others.
And a few others.
And
it's
a few
not
others,
just the two of us.
But we're representing.
We're not a club of two.
The Carolina Rover Owners Club and the Royal Off-Road Vehicle Expeditionary and Recreation Society, Rovers, are sponsoring the Oxford to America Summer Land Rover Fundraiser Rally. The event will take place on June 29th through July 1st and will be located at the Chaos Off-Road Park, which is located near Capon Bridge, West Virginia. It's about 30 minutes west of Winchester, Virginia. The cost of each vehicle will be $95. Registration is open through the Rove website, not Rovers, but the Rove website. We'll have a link, of course, on our webpage. And the purpose behind this rally, except, of course, having some off-roading fun, is to help raise funds for Oxford to America project. And the idea, of course, is to bring the Oxford truck to America, looking to be in 2019.
Now, would that be the Oxford truck and the important personnel involved?
That is being involved in some of the planning for that. That is the intent. I don't know. A lot of those details, though, are certainly not confirmed at this point. It is just there's some momentum, so let's do something. So that
absolutely. I mean, of course, Adam. I would think he would travel with his truck, and I would love to have him here. And of course, we really want to talk to Tim, so that would be great.
Tim is enough of a fan of the Americas.
Yeah,
be happy to take another trip and visit family.
Doesn't take much of an arm twist to make that happen for him.
Probably at this point actually need to get Will Hedrick. We need to get Will involved, because I did some digging on the U.S. Department of Transportation site about bringing a vehicle into the United States, even on a temporary basis. My reading of it, and this is where we need some clarification, is since Adam is the owner of the truck, Adam would need to come with the truck. The truck can stay for like 90 days or 6 months, I believe, without any changes being made to it, as you would expect. If the owner of the truck leaves the country, the truck must leave the country. So that's like you get clarification from I think Will would be most helpful in that area.
I think he would. Mind you, of course, this truck is definitely eligible for the 25-year exemption, so that might make it moot. But
no, it doesn't. It didn't.
Okay.
At least that's my reading of it. It was
we should talk to Will then and make sure.
Yeah, it was all
right, as opposed to a permanent import for a temporary.
I think there's also a special exemption for basically museum exhibit type exhibition thing.
Yes, you are correct. But then the truck cannot go. My reading on that was the truck could not be driven on government roads.
Right. There are a bunch of restrictions on it then.
So then what happens then is, if that's the case, and it seems like that might be the way to go because it's a show truck fine, then we have to get ready to have the truck transported across the country. And the plan was to have clubs all across the United States, North America, involved in bringing the truck here, and then the truck would go on tour. Hopefully Tim would go along and go on tour with the truck. So if it does come in...
An official motorcade from event to event then.
If the truck does come in under this, it comes in without its owner and is under a special exemption with that, as you indicated, Mike, then we would have to get it transported. So there's now an additional cost to...
you get a nice trailer, and then you can have different people tow it, and I towed this car. Special stickers or special...
I'm with you. But you just
mind you, Adam doesn't like that truck being a trailer queen. So,
but you get my point. This is why we need to help. They want to bring it to the United States, so I think that will happen, or to North America. I think that'll happen. It's just a matter of what are the logistics and the details, and there are specific points of the law and regulations that we need to follow to make sure it happens.
Okay, good point.
And my guess is Adam probably wants some insurance on that too.
And then there would be we would also have to pay for insurance, right? Now, there's other things. How much is transport going to cost? Are we transporting it back from from North America, or are they going to go to somewhere else after that? Do we have to, would we then share the cost of transporting it to South America or Australia or Asia? Again, there's a lot of variables here, but that's what's in play. So the idea for this event was, let's get the ball rolling and get some awareness out there.
If nothing else, get some seed money going.
And that's the news. Our guest this month is Bryan Joslin of Alloy and Grit magazine. Bryan interviewed Jerry McGovern, Land Rover's chief designer, at the LA Auto Show last year. He posted his interview in January and published it in the spring edition of the Alloy and Grit magazine. We talked with Bryan in February to do an extensive review and discussion of the interview. Bryan recorded the interview at the LA Auto Show to write his story, and he provided us with the audio files for the podcast. The recording conditions were not ideal, but we thought it was important and necessary for you to hear Mr. McGovern directly. Before we get to the discussion of the McGovern interview back at the LA Auto Show, there was a recent interview with McGovern from Forbes, and this is called Land Rover Design Chief on Bespoke, Range Rovers, and Brand Ambition. And this was April 30th, so that's why we're talking about it now. A couple interesting things to point out from this interview. McGovern says some Range Rover customers will want to place their twist on it. This has to do with special vehicles. Yet, from his experience, many will go along with this curated choice of color combinations for interior and exterior. Quote, this way, they are confident it will look right. Wrong combinations of color and trim can shrink the volume or alter the design. You'll hear in a few moments as we talk about that. He wants to be in control, man.
Yeah, he's exactly right. The whole right or wrong thing, as it in Jerry's mind, is not necessarily what everybody else wants.
Yeah, and I had noticed that playing with the build your vehicle, that there are certain options that change trims and all of that. So it's interesting to experience obviously I'm not really a potential customer for one of those vehicles, but to experience it from that aspect.
For those vehicles, yes. But on the other hand, we just went through this process with John's 110 and choosing the colors for all of the fabrics inside the truck to coordinate with the exterior color choice, which was also chosen from a list of custom colors. And I mean, yeah, the right color combination really makes it pop. But yeah, I mean, so it is important. But it's also not about saying, well, you only get this color or you don't get that color. It's choosing everything to work well together.
The article further goes on to say, I asked McGovern if introducing limited cars is part of the brand narrative. He replies, quote, I see them more as additions. It's about developing and curating the brand. Crucially, the SVO, that's unquote. And then crucially, what SVO does is to allow the team to produce cars that would otherwise not be possible in mass volume. Quote, it isn't just about doing bespoke editions of vehicles we have, but creating ones we don't have, such as this car. SVO allows for opportunity to stretch the brand. It gives it more appeal. Make cars like this SV Coupe, which are very exclusive and very rare, unquote. Capability, McGovern feels, will always be part of the Land Rover story, but it is more about what the cars represent, that sense of elevation. This is quoting him. Cars like the Range Rover need to remain classic, but we have and will do cars that will be more radical, unquote. He says, we have only seen a third of the contemporary Land Rover story with the Range Rover and the Discovery families. Quote, when the Defender family arrives, then all we have been doing will all make sense to you. It's about curating the products and finding the right solutions to sustain the company. I can promise you there's a big story there, and there is a lot of ambition, unquote.
Well, certainly lots of ambition, but I'm not sure I'm going to think it makes sense or not. I hope it does.
I hope so, too, and didn't plan this, but I think it's a good intro into this deep dive that we did on the McGovern interview.
I find it a little bit ironic that Jerry talks about, Range Rovers in terms of being classic, because I don't think Jerry gives a hoot about classic and heritage and other things like that.
What did he call it? Modern Land Rover? Is that what he said? Contemporary Land Rover is a different animal, and it's not.
Well, certainly it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that brings you full circle back to what we briefly mentioned at the beginning, that contemporary from classic are two different beasts. And where did the shift happen?
And we're not going to talk about that now because it's going to take it, because we'll never do anything else.
I'm just going to say, when did Jerry get hired?
Again, we're not. That sounds like it's a story, a whole discussion we need to reserve for the podcast later. But yes, I think this shows that maybe the best way to put this in context is Jerry clearly is the contemporary Land Rover person, and we are the heritage Land Rover people, and I think we're going to clash for a while. All right, and now the deep dive discussion of the Jerry McGovern interview with Alloy and Grit back at the LA Auto Show. Joining us now on the show is Bryan Joslin of Alloy and Grit. As our listeners probably know, Bryan interviewed Jerry McGovern, who is the chief designer of Land Rover, back on November 30th, 2017 at the LA Auto Show. Article went up online shortly after that, and then it will be available in the spring issue of Alloy and Grit magazine, so you can read it there. Bryan was nice enough to provide us with the audio of the interview, and we're going to do a deep dive, break it down, and pretty much go line by line and give our thoughts and comments on it. Bryan, thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for helping us out with this kind of a unique, special part of the show.
Yeah, glad to be part of it.
So I'll read the question and that was in the magazine and online, and we will listen to a number of clips from that. We're not going to listen to the entire interview, but we will listen to clips and then comment them as we go. Question number one, the first question. The last few years have been really good for Land Rover. How much of that do you suppose is attributable to design versus improvements in quality?
I'm not criticising that, but in order for us to get to the critical mass we need to in terms of volume and to become sustainable in the long term, we needed to grow. And for me, that was about creating vehicles that were more universally desirable through design. Design is, in my view, is the differentiator in the marketplace. Once everything becomes comparable, whether it's technology or quality or whatever, what are you left with? You're left with the DNA of your brand, and design is the conduit that communicates what the brand stands for. And we output design centre stage at the business. And clearly, capability has always been important to us, and it always will be. It is at the core. But capability on its own wasn't enough for us to make that leap. And in some respects, it was pulling us back a little bit as well, because people would look at these vehicles and we were promoting on the basis purely of that capability. They look at what they do because of what they do, and I think that it was polarising people. Say, yeah, that's great, they can do all that, but it's not for me. I don't need all that stuff. So, you know, we've maintained the essence of the brand without it becoming generic, but at the same time, we have made it more universal.
So Jerry fancies himself a designer, of a first-rate, top-tier designer, as I think we'll see later in the interview.
I think he fancies himself the best designer in the world.
Okay, that's what I did want to say, but thank you for going there.
Oh, I can say it. I have no problem with that.
I do think that. I agree with you. I think he thinks he's the ultimate guy when it comes to design.
Sometimes I think he feels like he's the only one who understands what design is.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. It's very possible.
But I think his points here are important. That exactly what he says, that for Land Rover to be sustainable in the long run, it couldn't just be about capable vehicles. And I think especially as we see what's happening with the industry of vehicles and drivers as a whole, that they are much more of a commodity now than they are a necessity in most parts of the world, or many parts of the world. So something certainly had to be changed there to make them still a desirable vehicle.
I think you're right, because the bottom line is, where he starts is that you need to sell more vehicles, and you know, the idea is that the people who appreciate the capabilities are still somewhat limited in number. So to get a wider audience, you have to offer more than just capability.
Right. I mean, it's kind of the ugly truth of the of the marketplace, is that, you know, the engineers can make these things do incredible things, but if that's not a strong enough selling point for someone's actual needs, then there's other options, and you know, other manufacturers are winning on style and features and you know, luxury and better ride and things like that. So you do have to meet the market, and you know, if we're being honest, there's fewer unpaved roads in the world these days than ever before. The genuine need for most people to need a purely off-road vehicle is pretty low these days, and you know, the market's much bigger for people who need utility and a bit of luxury all in one package. So
here's, I guess, the crux of this, as you guys talk about this. He says that design is a differentiator. I completely agree. Need to sell more cars. Completely agree. Land Rover in particular, you know, is a worldwide worldwide mark, and it has an impression, and people kind of understand what it was and what it is. But then he talks about that, you know, design should be a differentiator in the marketplace. My thought, though, is the vehicles look like all the other vehicles on the marketplace. I don't think design is a differentiator that he thinks that it is.
Well, it should be a differentiator. I just don't know that he knows how to use those tools properly.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there are elements that he feels are differentiators, and then there are the elements that he's using to, you know, make them more universally desirable vehicles. Those are probably the elements that make them look a lot more similar to other vehicles, or especially vehicles within Land Rover's own vehicle line set, right? That we certainly feel that, you know, Discoveries are starting to look a lot more like Range Rovers, and we have no idea what the Defender is going to look like.
Oh yeah, we do. We have a pretty good idea.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, it's going to look like a Range Rover or a Discovery. But yeah,
it's going to be a Discovery with a spare tire mounted on the back.
No, not at all. Not at all. I haven't seen
externally mounted tire.
No, I agree with that part. All right, let's listen to the next clip from this question.
You look at the vehicles here. These are vehicles that stir the emotions of people, clearly.
Yeah.
And I always like to remind people in our business that, you know, we're not producing commodities. We're creating objects of desire and products that people literally fall in love with for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And that could be, you know, different whether to a Range Rover, a Discovery, or a Defender.
And he was specifically referring to the Defender that was on a page of Alloy and Grit that was there for Jerry to look at. Nice little feather in your cap there, Bryan, for having him actually see the magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brian's no dummy. He knows how to play it.
Oh, yeah. Indeed. So he's right. I do agree with this point that emotions are stirred in people about the cars that they drive. I think that's one of the reasons why you have a 100-year history of the automobile, and people talk about them, and there are car clubs, and there's podcasts. There are now 2 podcasts about a specific marque that they do stir emotions in people, and I completely agree with him on that.
And that number is 132, by the way.
Years of the automotive market?
Correct.
Okay. So I do agree with him on that, but I still think this design thing, he doesn't. I think he's missing the point of design again.
It's his view of design, and that's really the issue. Is that he's taken his view and just assumed that that's the way the world is.
I would go further. I thought of this now. I don't think he understands the emotions that were stirred in people by what has come before, specifically in Land Rover. I don't think he gets that.
No, he probably doesn't.
Yeah, I've interviewed him a couple times now and been at other events with him, media events and so on. And I would definitely agree that his perception of the brand is probably different than most of, what you would call a traditional Land Rover enthusiast. He probably associates more closely with the Range Rover side of the business than the rugged utility part, in his own nature. And but it comes back to sales again, and that's the part of the market that's performing. It's not the basic utility end of the market that's going to make them sales at the margins they need to make. So he's rightfully focused on the right direction as a business manager, which is really what he comes down to. Is that's his job is to make these things sell.
Well, and his products are selling. The stuff he's created is selling, and so I mean he's successful in that regard. But I think just my take on him is that he wants to do he needs to do whatever he needs to do to make the vehicle sell. But at the same time, I think he's thoroughly willing to throw away any history in order to make that happen.
Well, I think as a chief of design, you're constantly reinterpreting history. You can't. He'll touch on that later in the interview. You'll see, where he talks about you can't just do a retro design and call it a day. To satisfy the old line,
right?
You've got to be moving forward, and some of what they're doing really is fairly progressive for the for the automotive industry, both inside and out. And I think, again, when you get later into the interview, he talks about some of the design similarities and differences between models, and it really
or
does
lack
come down
thereof in my take.
Well, in a nuanced sense, though, we can say that the front end of a Range Rover and a new Discovery look a lot alike. He'll tell you that the side graphics entirely different. The Range Rover's got an unbroken waistline all the way down the greenhouse, where the Discovery has the arch. There's all kinds of nuances that a designer sees that the general public doesn't. We tend to fixate on the face of the cars, but he looks much deeper, and I'm not to defend him, but it's his profession, and at some point I think we have to. It's working, so we have to give him credit. If it's bringing more people into the brand, and they're not the people we're used to seeing, that's a different story. But he's definitely
you're right. It is working, and that's what's maybe perhaps the most frustrating.
I agree with you guys. Everything, it is working. It has saved Land Rover from going away, which I think was a distinct possibility that it could have just disappeared into oblivion, especially around the 2008 economic crash, because Ford needed to give things up. But to go back to this specific clip, it was about the emotions that vehicles stir in people, and I just to get back to that point, because there's certainly a lot to talk about later. Again, I don't think he seeds that emotion. Not that I disagree with cars stir emotions. I don't think he understands or comprehends, or whatever appropriate word there is, what the old-time Land Rovers, the heritage vehicles, do, as I like to call them, for folks in the marque. And we'll see that later. He says, basically, deal with it. We're moving on. And I understand moving on. Moving on kept the marque going, and allows us to have this deep conversation right now about it, because otherwise we'd say, be talking about them, if they had only done a V8 back in, 63, those kind of conversations that go on about cars have disappeared.
And in that regard, he certainly is stirring emotions, maybe just not the emotions he thinks he's stirring.
Along those lines, one of the things that it feels like he doesn't tie in as much to the original brand and style of the vehicles that we so associate with. And obviously there's some portion of it where all the newer vehicles have to be a lot more aerodynamic, which limits the, external design features significantly. I think we've seen that in a lot of other marques over the years that we haven't seen with Land Rover. And specifically the Defender, I think we are in a very unique situation compared to other marques in that the Defender was very minorly changed physically from its introduction as the Land Rover in 1948 all the way through its discontinuation in, 2016 that they finally ended the run. Mm-hmm. Almost every single other marque out there, their flagship vehicle had to be completely brought into a modern era far earlier than Land Rover was, right?
So perhaps we've been a bit spoiled in that regard.
I think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, you can look at various sports cars or all sorts of other vehicles, even other off-road vehicles, four-wheel drive vehicles, and it was probably in the 90s when they were redrawn completely. And people then started complaining that, this doesn't look like our vehicle. Or it looks like some new plastic thing.
Or they completely disappeared. The Bronco disappeared. And even the Jeeps have an unbroken history in many ways that is longer than Land Rovers, as we know. And they have a continuous model, but I don't follow Jeeps all that well, but I suspect that there's a change somewhere, because I've heard there's a discussion somewhere when the Jeep completely changed from what it was. What is that? Is that the XJ model? I really don't follow Jeep as I should.
Yeah, I think the XJ is where it was the biggest change, but they still preserved a lot of the technical functional aspects.
Sure, but not like Land Rover did, I think.
Right.
Because I would suggest it was because Land Rover didn't have the money to invest and update. They instead built something new and fresh when they had the money to do that.
Well, that's the interesting thought I've always had is, what if all these years they'd actually had development money and could have evolved a normal model over the course of 70 years instead of in a couple of rough iterations, decades apart from each other, which is effectively what the series Defender evolution was,
Right.
And would we be as emotionally attached if there had been a natural progression, if it had moved away from that bulkhead construction and the flat panels and all that back in the 50s or 60s, and been more contemporary, at that time, and continued to evolve through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and so on. I think the Volkswagen Beetle is probably the only other vehicle that really is analogous to that, in that, the basic form remained essentially intact from beginning to end. I mean, with relatively minor modifications by industry standards. Clearly, the new Beetle wasn't the same as the Volkswagen Beetle that replaced it. It paid homage to the form, but it wasn't even an entry-level car when that came out. So,
and under the skin, it was absolutely, completely dissimilar.
Absolutely, it shared nothing except four wheels, in a general silhouette. So,
right,
that's probably the closest analogy there can be. Even the Porsche 911, which has had a fairly unbroken history, has evolved more progressively, with each generation, well, at least starting in the 90s. They've done a great job of retaining what was the essence of the car and its looks, even though technically it's, the first generation, the current generation share enough. And that's been a relatively normal model progression, 2-3 decades. So it's a weird situation by anyone's standards, for a car to go 70 years with such minor development changes. And so it's, that's the emotional part, though. Everyone knows that silhouette. It's like an icon of not just Land Rover, but of the off-roading hobby and the overland travel old world. I mean, you can just put that silhouette on so many things and it stands for something immediately. And I think that's where the emotional part comes in. And yeah, the newer ones don't have that. Certainly not the Defender silhouette. I think they've done a great job of managing the Range Rover in that regard. There's a lot of similarity, and if you're a Range Rover person, I think that carries through, and you do still have that emotional connection to it. They might look like jelly bean blobs to us, but compared to some of the other things that are in the market, they still have a shape. They have shoulders. They have something that still connects with that inner spirit of adventure, whatever that Land Rover has always stood for. So.
And it's recognizable. That's the key.
Right. And it had that progression through the years, right? Where, the P38 and then on to the newer models, you could see it change more slowly over the years. So if you compare what you have now back to the original Range Rover Classic, you can sort of see the relationship, but along the lines, there were those smaller changes to help us sort of follow along and understand the design evolution. Yeah. Whereas with the Defender, that's not going to happen. We go for a really big jump.
And those design evolutions came in the context of the market, at the time. So, the flush headlights on a P38 were a radical departure from the old round 7-inch, but that was what the times called for. And then, the L322 was entirely different from P38, but clearly carried over, some key design cues. I mean, it was more than just design cues. It was the general form just modernized and so on. And yeah, with the Defender, there hasn't really been that. It's
well, not since really, 1959.
Yeah, it's right. It's really been a much different vehicle in the marketplace, which I think is more controversial.
That it was not also really not available in the U.S., the largest car market for a number of years. When they finally had the opportunity to bring it here, it had to get its special exemptions, as we know, because of the marketplace. So,
right. Well, because by the time they finally started trying to sell it here, it was obsolete.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
right.
Well, this is probably a good opportunity. Why don't we move on to the next part of this question, the last part of this question, and this, I think, will last about a minute or so. So this is...
I want to have the most desirable cars and designs, but I also want them to have true engineering integrity. And they are mutually compatible.
Sure.
Both design and engineering are aligned, and that doesn't mean one having power over the other. It means them having equality and working together. So Nick, who's our head of engineering, he's as passionate about delivering the designs as I am, and I'm as passionate about making sure they're engineered as well as they are designed, and I think that is quite a refreshing approach. But our approach is different to what it was before, and I'm sure it's different to a lot of other manufacturers. In design, we vision the concept, we create the designs, the vision, and then we engineer it. In a lot of businesses, they engineer the package, the platform, everything else, and give it to designers so they can make this look good. The horse is bolted by then.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we can create things that are truly differentiated. So it's an exciting time.
So engineering and design, and what he's referring to is that previously, as we've heard, in Land Rover world, engineering was primary and design reported engineering. When Tata took over, design was on equal footing with engineering. And I think as we're seeing that bear out now in the product as it's now rolling off the assembly lines.
Yep. I think the critical point there is the competition. You look at someone like Audi and Porsche and Volkswagen, they're all on a very modular platform, and the design of each of those models is very much dictated by the overarching engineering package. And not that there's not similarities, certainly within the Range Rover and Discovery 5 lineup right now, and certainly Jaguar as well, F-Pace. But the sense I got was that they really do get to dictate the look, the shape, the general form before applying the engineering to it. And a lot of that engineering is modular, obviously, these days anyway. So
at that point, they're not truly equal, though. If you're designing the shape of the package first and then engineering it, then really engineering reports to design at that point.
No, I think what he's getting at is that the functionality of the vehicle from an engineering standpoint has to live up to the in as much as the design has to perform, if that makes any sense. He can't just dictate a look and get away with it if it interrupts the functionality of the vehicle. And I know that's subject to debate, I suppose, as well. But they do remain supremely functional vehicles, especially against anything they're up against in the marketplace. So well, I'll leave it at that, I guess. But
I have no complaints in that regard. I mean, I think the engineering is still top notch. It just the way things are worded, it just sounds a bit like, he wants to call them equal, but yet design should be more equal than engineering.
They report to each other. They work very closely. Was the sense I got. So,
and that's how it should be, I guess.
Yeah,
I'd like to flesh out a little bit more.
More importantly, I think before Tata's involvement, it was much more the other way around, where design was, an afterthought to the engineering package.
We'll leave it alone for 70 years. I'm kidding. I'd like to tease out a little bit on the modular design aspects. If Land Rover's moving to a modern way of building, as they should, and they need to have good reliability and compete with all the other automakers out there that have increased their reliability, doesn't that kind of lock in the engineering side of it, that there's only so many things that you can do, or do I not understand how that modular design aspect works? It seems to me that... Well, go ahead.
The expensive stuff, the engines, drivetrains, obviously that's all shared cross-platform. There's a lot of subsystems that people don't give much thought to. Things like HVAC and really the electrical, the nerve network of the car. And so where you can have more commonality beneath the surface, I think is what they're going for. You have greater reliability. If you can make a wiring harness work across 3 different models, and that's probably simplified, but, if you can have a general architecture electrically that works across multiple models, not re-engineering everything for each model at that point. And the same with, it's the expensive, unseen things, under the dash, under the carpet that we don't give much thought to, but, it has to... Really, they need the economies of scale, for that heater core, for that ductwork, for the control module. It doesn't necessarily have to look the same on the surface, but it's got to be the same beneath the surface. And
well, then that would also lock in some design aspects too, would it not? Because then if you have the heater box is going to be so many centimeters by so many centimeters and needs to be at this height and this location generally, that then would inform, I think, design too. So I think that's maybe where this... Maybe that's where Jerry's talking about when they work collaboratively together. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, and I mean, you can look at a Range Rover full body and a Range Rover Sport, and you'll see, the vents in the same location, but there's different shapes and different housings, different trim around them. So, the design on the surface, what we touch and what we see, is differentiated, even though the general form is shared. The locations are at the same height and basically the same width apart and things like that.
So what you're saying is it's just like it's like General Motors back in the 80s, when the Oldsmobile looked the same as the Buick and the Chevy and the Pontiac. I'm kidding.
Yeah, to a degree, except it's only 2 brands instead of 5.
I know. I'm kidding, but it's the same. It's really the same idea, though. That's why General Motors had 5 different. They designed one car and it looked 5 different ways.
Yeah.
They've actually gotten much better at that than they used to be. It used to be you really couldn't tell them apart except for looking at the badges, but they've learned since then you can do shared platforms and they don't have to look identical.
Right. Well, then they also eliminated 2 of those platforms completely,
which they needed to do as well. But
that gives them more freedom for the for the things on the surface. The leather treatments, the woods, the aluminum trims. All the things that people touch and see, from the driver's seat, for instance, can all be differentiated, higher levels of materials as the price goes upward and, more technical materials, carbon fiber and things like that for more technically focused models. And that's where I think, as a designer, that's where they would rather spend their energy rather than trying to figure out how to design a dash panel to go around some weird ductwork that the engineering guys did.
Yeah, and I think that brings me too, because they're collaborating so much. Clearly, Jerry is focused very much on the design. And I think there's a lot of design that we don't even necessarily think about because we're focusing on the exterior, and they're doing a lot with the interior as well. Obviously, some of the engineering dictates that, but they're certainly pushing in directions where, like with their new, center touch screen, which a lot of other manufacturers are doing, that allows them to remove a whole lot of physical controls. So therefore, they can use essentially the same wiring harness through multiple lines and stuff like that. But engineering is doing a really good job of fitting things into the design in new ways that people hadn't previously thought of before. One of my favorites is probably with the newer Discoveries, with the air intake system built into the hood, the bonnet, that normally they would have just sort of routed that through the engine bay somehow, but they decided to put it into some dead space that was there because of the design, right?
Right.
So there's a fair amount there. And obviously for some of Jerry's comments about why people like certain vehicles, are interested in certain vehicles, the work that they're doing on making the interior storage really convenient and expansive, filling up some of what normally is, again, dead space for wiring and ducts internal to the vehicle. Now he has lots of storage for iPhones and iPads and all sorts of things like that we may not initially say, oh, that's an amazing feature, but somebody who goes out, looks at a ton of SUVs, and they all are, fairly similar, as we certainly feel many of them are, but then they sit down in one that has cavernous storage at the ready all over the place. That's going to be something that attracts them to that vehicle, and maybe when they jump in somebody else's SUV, they're going to say, oh man, really missed that about Land Rover. They have all this storage that's easily accessible that none of the other models have. So I think some of it also is just switching in that direction that we don't associate with Land Rover, but newer generations may.
Yeah, there's functional design and there's purely aesthetic design, and I think a lot of times we get hung up on the appearance. Does it look like a Land Rover? When down deep, does it function like a Land Rover is just as valid. And things like deep door pockets and center consoles and, backrest pockets. God, some models don't even have, they have a flimsy net or something, for the back seats and, all those little things, all those nooks and crannies that, I have a 12-year-old daughter. I mean, she would fill every one of them up with something on a road trip, but until you've not had those features, you can't really appreciate them.
I'd like to see the window controls move back to the center console as a personal issue. Why don't we move on to the next question? The next question is, if you had to define Land Rover design in 3 words, what 3 words truly express Land Rover design? And Jerry, you'll see this in the written part, Jerry really liked this question. He had never been asked this before.
My vocabulary is so, it's touching on verbosity, so I find it difficult to limit it to 3 words. That's a bloody good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Design that has the ability to elevate itself above the ordinary, whether it's, the design of a watch, a pen, or a building, or whatever. To me, it's 3 components. Visceral, when I look at it, do I desire it? Second, behavioural, when I've got it, does it work properly? And then last but not least, reflective. Once I've used it, abused it, spent time with it, do I still desire it? Does it still behave? And am I building a lasting relationship with it? To me, that's, it's a bit like any sort of relationship to some degree.
Yeah.
But we don't, I think, the danger with all these sort of challenges that are coming at us, when I think about, I've had a lot of questions today about how will electrification approach your the way you design vehicles, and will you take advantage of the things that electrification brings, which really, in terms of the vehicle design and packaging, is basically, do you have a bonnet or not? Do you make it cap forward, do you make it one box? for me, the danger is that we start thinking about these products as commodities rather than objects of desire.
Right.
And the technology or whatever it is should be embraced in a way that doesn't erode the desirability of the product in its DNA. So for me, DNA is God. That's what.
So DNA is God. And I think we're
Yes.
still learning about what Jerry thinks the DNA of Land Rover is. And
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how he defines DNA.
And this is where I come back to. I think he's really more of a Range Rover person when it comes to aesthetics and function than a series Defender kind of enthusiast. Because in all of his interpretations, it really points back more to the Range Rover kind of ethos than the Land Rover utility ethos.
Right, definitely. I mean, that's certainly where he fits into the target market of Land Rover anyway. So it makes
Range
sense.
Rover's had the most explosive growth of new models.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
well, they also make the most money. And that's where
Well,
where the market is.
And that's a very
Right.
important
I mean,
part to him
what
keeping
he's
his
doing.
job.
Yeah, what he's doing still works. I'm not arguing with it. It's just an observation.
And there's way more overhead. There's blue sky ahead yet for Range Rover. I mean, they haven't reached the pinnacle of what they can accomplish with that because there's always more money at the top. Mm-hmm. It's hard to squeeze more out of less at the lower end of the market. So, the Range Rover undeniably is probably his main focus.
And that's where definitely where the market is going, as you see everybody and their brother coming out with an SUV or some sort of SUV-esque capability now. Porsche has one, and Audi, and even Bentley, right, came out with the Bentayga. So
right.
That proves your point. And Land Rover was, I think, very well positioned to take advantage of that, and did it expertly, mind you, at the right time, and was in the right place. And Jerry has done a good job in designing, I think, keeping that heritage of the Range Rover and adding models to it.
But perhaps at the detriment of the Land Rover side of things. I mean, for the longest time, the Range Rover was perceived as a premium Land Rover. Now I think the Land Rover is going to be perceived as a poor man's Range Rover.
Yes. I would, yes, yes, and I suspect Jerry would say, okay, so what? They want to bring in. That's where the money is. The high market customers that have the cash to pay for those vehicles, and that's overall helps the brand too, mind you.
So then, at what point do you change the name of the company?
What do you mean? Well,
just call it Range Rover. It's what it is.
Well, they did that in the U.S. for a while, did they not?
Right.
Yeah.
And it caused a lot of
back,
confusion. People are still confused now because they don't understand the difference. And I think Jerry's not helping in that regard.
I don't know. That's interesting. I don't think you're going to see the name change. You as a heritage customer, if I can call you that, Harold, you need to change your thinking. Is really what's coming through here.
My thinking notwithstanding, I'm just making observations here, and it just seems like he's becoming much more Range Rover centric, and that's fine if that's what's keeping the company going. So that
I would argue the market is leaning more in that direction as well, and we can. I mean, we know how many Defenders they sold towards the end of the run. They weren't selling many, despite the fact they were building them. And the market just wasn't responsive. It's not what the majority of the market wanted in an SUV. And,
right. So my point is, if 60 or 70% or whatever the number is of your product is a Range Rover, why are you calling it a Land Rover Range Rover? Just call it a Range Rover and just change the name of the company.
Because they're still going to have Defenders and Discoveries. So,
well, let's hope that matters.
Yeah.
Well, back to the question about defining Land Rover in 3 words, and sounds like Harold, you would define it as not Range Rover. That was good. I thought of that just as we were talking. That was good. I appreciate it. Pat myself in the back. Design has the ability to elevate itself above the ordinary, and then he said there are 3 components: visceral, behavioral, and reflective. So it's
kind of,
and I like how he looks at that. I like that. I agree with what he's saying.
Yeah.
Arguably, he dodged the bullet there by not really defining. And he said, I really stumped him with that when it was the end of the day when we did our interview. He was definitely not prepared for that. But his 3 elements are I think, universal to good design, and I think that's what he was getting at, and what his goal is with everything he designs is the visceral nature of it, the desirability, and then do you fall in love with it and treasure it forever, and
do you continue to love it after you've used it?
Yeah.
I completely agree with him.
I like that. It's a really good answer. It doesn't answer the question, but it's still a really good answer.
I think it's a great insight into design philosophy, though. That he applies to everything that he does anyway.
Right.
However we interpret that, but.
Well, I think it's a positive answer for us in that he at least is thinking about the elements that lead into what Land Rover should be. And since we're very concerned about the new Defender, I think that makes me feel better, anyways. That he's been thinking about it, has an idea about it, and knows it's something you can touch and feel and taste. Is kind of really what he's saying there. Will you still like it? It's that turnaround factor, that people say when you buy a new vehicle. And then 2-3 years down the line, do you still park it? And then 30 seconds later, do you still turn and look at it? That's kind of the stuff he's hinting at here or getting to, and that's what more
importantly, do you want another one?
And then do you want another? Right. Well, for him, do you want another one? Will you buy a new one in 2 years? But that's
whenever the time comes that you don't want this one anymore, if either you've used it up or you want something new, are you going to come back to the brand?
Right, and I think that's what this is what he means by the DNA. I believe DNA is God. He's saying I think it's those elements there. It's that visceral and that behavioral and that reflective. It's and that's. To him, that's design, but I also think that's what to us, it's also design. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it.
Do you have some clarity there?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, again, to harken back to what we've discussed about how, especially the Defender has been pretty much a single model all the way for 60, 70 years.
Which, by the way, I've said before, is over half the history of the automobile.
Right. Exactly. It's actually pretty mind-boggling to sit down and think about that. Wow.
Made the same way in the same factory.
Right.
By the same people.
It's shocking. But it also ties back to this, that it sort of leads us, what we see with Jerry and Land Rover specifically focusing more on the heritage and the desires for Range Rover. Most companies in their marketing and their product lineup, they shoot for a good, better, best trifecta of product line. The best is where they're probably going to make their most money, and that's going to do the most marketing for them too. Generally, they want people to go for either the middle, the better, or the best. They do have that sort of low-end price point to sneak people in, get them comfortable with the brand, and bring them back.
Gateway drug.
Exactly, and certainly that clearly has been the target with the Evoque for the Range Rover line, and that has worked quite well. So, in the past, we didn't really have, until they switched to also producing the Range Rover and the Discovery, there was no good, better, best. That was all the one model. That was the
you had only the good, yes.
Right.
There were long and there were short. And there were open and there were closed, but there were not good, better, best. There was
right. They're all good. Choose your size.
Yeah. Exactly. And otherwise they didn't really change much over the years.
Well, they also didn't have the money, Morgan, to do that. Yeah, I think they would have loved to have done that, but they didn't have that capability and financial wherewithal to be able to do that. But continue with your thought.
That's what the Range Rover was, right? That was them building a new vehicle that would go off and progress into what it has become today.
Yes, and coil sprung and all those modern conveniences.
Right. The vehicle that built the mark and was the sort of cornerstone really stayed the same. So there was never that good, better, best in terms of that market, which clearly, as us being heritage owners, or several of us, that's what we feel the DNA of the brand is. And the other side of that is that what we've discussed prior is that the design was an afterthought. In the Range Rover Classic, it was an afterthought that won awards and was kept. You know, they hired a designer and they decided, no, we'll tweak some grills and some lines here, but overall what you came up with is perfect.
Well,
so
lasted 25 years.
Yeah.
Short compared to the series Defender line, but still long by its contemporaries.
Exactly.
They would have liked to have shortened that product cycle too, but they were still sending money back to other parts of the company that weren't making money. So,
right.
You know, I mean, the four doors, the automatics, all that stuff they would have liked to have implemented much earlier. They just didn't have funding to do it either. And, you know, 25 years, is long for most models, short by Land Rover standards, but it's never a matter of they didn't want to develop, they just couldn't.
But at the same time, maybe they didn't have to. I mean, it was working still.
They lost market share, though, to Japanese SUVs, you know, at a time when they couldn't invest. The Discovery, you know, was a new model, but really, you know, a Range Rover underneath it all. They did what they could, but I think they would have liked to have been more competitive throughout the, you know, I think it killed them to have to pull out of the U.S. market after 74. I don't think they really wanted to do that. They just couldn't afford to develop and you know, make sense of it as a business case. So I think that's been their history, is that they've never had the
you almost wonder
never the dollars.
You almost wonder if they'd brought the Range Rover over right away, if that would have helped them.
Right.
Because when they pulled out in 74, it was just the series. That's all they had to play with.
Right.
Yeah, if they had come to the market with the Range Rover in 70 when it was introduced.
Yeah.
But it also was not the model everybody in America thinks that it was either. It was not that premium plush model. It was just a.
It was
nicer
premium relative to a Series 2,
yes,
but other than that, no.
Yeah,
exactly.
But it still was
an International Scout or, you know, a Bronco, or it was still a fairly premium vehicle. You know, it would have been a nice vehicle, and that model was always intended for the States. So,
really? I guess I didn't realize that.
So my last point on his sort of design description of the visceral, behavioral, and the reflective, that original Land Rover was really mostly just sold on the behavioral, and we all developed that sort of reflective nostalgia and comfort with those vehicles.
Look at you putting that together. So, that was actually, I didn't know where you were going, and I'm like, that makes sense.
So that's what I mean, that with the whole, you know, that Land Rover going for the almost 70-year production period was just purely on a technical standpoint. And so we look at everything Jerry is doing and say, oh, wow, this is all new. But we never had those sort of progressions throughout its manufacture period where it was revamped a little bit every step of the way. We didn't have any of the design factor. I mean, in 59, they rounded off some corners, and that was pretty much it.
They bumped out. They'll give you a little more elbow room.
Yeah,
right.
A little.
But you're talking about a vehicle which was originally designed using a stick and some beach sand.
Indeed.
So true.
Indeed.
So yeah, there's a lot that's happening now that original model just doesn't fit in, and it's hard for somebody like Jerry, or really hard for probably the entire company, to figure out how to make that transition work.
Well, let me make this. I think for Jerry in particular, maybe the design folks, they know that the average and the vast majority of Land Rover current customers do not care about the heritage part of it. They don't. Do they wave at you? Do they notice you when you're Series 3? They even know what a Series 3 is. They even know it's a Land Rover. How many Land Rover owners, especially in the United States, will come up to you and go, what is that? They don't know. And so I purport that they don't care. And Jerry doesn't have to, and maybe better way to put it is Jerry doesn't have to worry about that. McGovern and design folks don't have to worry about that. What they're doing
Jerry's
is
the type
working.
of guy who doesn't care anyway. He wouldn't worry about it no matter what. He's just going to do what he thinks he needs to do. And you're right in the sense that, you know, if a majority of the owners don't, I mean, you say a majority of the owners don't care. Whether that's true or not, that is going to be true at some point, because in order to get more people to the brand, you're going to have to attract a lot of people who don't get what Land Rovers used to be.
You look at the Evoque.
Or the Evoque, as the case
Damn
may
it,
be.
did I screw it up again?
Of course you did.
All right, let's move on. I think it's on that disappointment. Let's move on.
Everybody have a drink.
All right, next question is, and I like this one. I highlighted this one for Bryan to pull out. Talk about the difference between design and style.
Design is blank sheet of paper. You know, what's the concept going to be? What is it, first of all? What type of vehicle is it going to be? So you define the concept, and then you start working out, well, what does that look like in terms of vision, in terms of the way you place all those components which define the volume and proportions, and then you define the aesthetic for it. So it's looking at it from a more holistic point of view. That's a fundamental difference. Yeah.
I think it's an excellent question, and something to think about is what's the difference between design and style. And I happened to see a quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. I'm a big Frank Lloyd Wright fan. Paired up well with some of McGovern's comments. And Frank Lloyd Wright said, probably 1,000 years ago now, style is important. A style is not. There is all the difference when we work with style and not for a style. And the reason I bring that up is in how it relates to Jerry's, because Jerry talks about mid-century modernism that he likes, and
right.
and he mentions, and I almost think that. So here's my grand unified theory, I guess, of McGovern thinking of himself as the car designer, which is many ways what Frank Lloyd Wright thought. He was the house designer. He was the architect. So maybe some ways does McGovern think he's like Wright in that regard? But then
I think they have similar
hang on,
egos. That's for sure.
They have similar egos. Thank you. But then McGovern thinks that I think has a different vision of what style / design is to how Frank Lloyd Wright approached style and design. I guess is kind of what I'm going for here.
Well, the difference is that Wright designed what he designed and didn't care whether you could build it or not. He designed a lot of stuff that was incredibly difficult to build. Number one, and number two, it leaked like a sieve in the rain.
At the time,
and when you quizzed him about it, he said, "Well, that's what happens when you leave a piece of art out in the rain." Yes. And I don't think Jerry's anywhere near that arrogant.
I don't know. I I just bring it up.
I would add that I've been around a lot of car designers, and it is part and parcel of the job to have supreme confidence in your work. And Jerry is not unique in that regard. I think when you get to the top level of automotive design, if you don't walk in with that attitude, I mean, I used to interview Chris, BMW designer, Chris Bangle, who was likewise supremely comfortable with what he was doing, and at a time when most people thought he was off his rocker. But his designs have held up because his design was pure in a way. It didn't just follow trends. In fact, arguably a lot of people followed BMW's design trends once they were out in the marketplace. So Jerry's not unique in that way. I think it's just part of the job. If you're going to be a top level designer, you have to carry yourself with that kind of confidence.
You need a confidence. You need a good ego. Absolutely. I just wonder if it's in the same place as maybe he thinks he's in.
No, I don't see his attitude being much different than most other designers.
Okay.
Other car companies. From our perspective, yes, but once you've been around a few of them, it's pretty much the way they run.
Well, so to go on with Wright's comment, do you think that McGovern is designing a style, or is he take style as important and not designing a style? No,
I think he's designing. And elsewhere in that conversation, he talks about styling almost as a matter of gingerbread or decoration, where design has some fundamental roots to it. There's geometry, there's balance, other elements that make up good style. Where fashion is really or make up good design. Where style is subject to taste of the times. Style comes and goes, but good design stands the test of time. And I think.
I saw that part you were talking about, and the way he describes style, that just it brings to mind the comment that's made a lot in the custom vehicle world, and the fabricators talk about people do that sort of thing as cake decorating.
Right. So he's definitely trying to create a look that will stand the test of time, but more so a structure, an architecture in a way that will hold up, and I think the earliest Range Rover is a great example of something that was not really styled. It was designed. It was designed around functionality and around an architecture that was already largely existent. It held up because it wasn't decorated with gingerbread. It didn't have chrome trim and fake vents and some other things that would have been common at the time. It didn't. It
doesn't have fins and spoilers and doesn't look like it's going fast.
Exactly. There's not a lot of embellishment. Everything's there for a reason. The creases in the bodywork are there for structural rigidity. The window line, the greenhouse, the continuing greenhouse, which has been an element of pretty much every generation of Range Rover, kind of a natural design progression. With the sliding windows and the what became the floating roof line. That was a fairly pure design, and that's an element that's held up over time. When everyone else is, I sometimes look at some of the things that car makers are putting out right now, and Jerry was kind of pointing out to the show floor during this interview as well. Some of the surface details that don't need to be there. If you look at any of the new Toyotas, with the really over the top surface details and light treatments and some of the stuff, that stuff's not going to look good in 5 years. 5 months. That other new trend right now with the pinched rear window light on the D-pillar, leading in. The Nissan Maxima started it with that little swage line that runs through the D-pillar, and everyone's copying that now. That's the kind of stuff that he was making sure to avoid, was these things that look fresh in the moment but are going to look dated and by the time the model generation comes to an end.
The Japanese tend to be really good at that, chasing fads. They have, for decades they've been doing it. Whereas
and the general market responds quickly to that, but then they're on to the next one.
But one of the things I really appreciate about British stuff is the timelessness.
Right.
So the next question is around form or function. The question is, which is more important in making memorable vehicles, form or function?
You think about a Defender, that's almost designed by default. And, despite all its impractical, it's sort of the fact that you need to be Quasimodo to drive it for more than a week and all the rest of it, and it's compromised because it was done 60 odd years ago. People will forgive that because they just love the car so much.
Yeah.
And it's the same with even modern day cars. Design has the ability to enrich people's lives. I would rather have certain attributes compromised if it allows you to achieve something that is far more distinctive and characterful rather than just being, comparable with everybody else in a media. I'd rather be really good at a few things rather than being equal on everything.
I like this answer. Just to repeat it, I would rather have certain attributes compromised if it allows me to achieve something that is far more distinctive in character. I don't think we're getting... I don't know. Are we going to get that with the new Defender? Is that...
I agree with that, but I don't think he's done that so far with any of his stuff.
He mentions
the Evoque. He mentions the Evoque in the interview where he talks about the really small rear window,
right,
and how internally he got a lot of flack about that, and he basically said, either we do it this way or we build the same thing everybody else is building, and that's a distinguishing design element that really sets it apart from a Ford Escape or Toyota RAV4. It's a more aggressive design that stands out. Whether it works
I will agree with
issue.
you. I will agree with you on that. Definitely with the Evoque.
And I think his general statement was, look, we can design these things to hit all of the specifications of every vehicle on the marketplace. You look at the midsize sedan segment, an Accord, a Camry, an Altima do a lot of the same things, and they're really not that differentiated because they do a lot of things really well, but none of them are distinctive, and they aren't statement vehicles of any kind. And maybe there's some flaws in some of the a little less perfect application of technology or whatever to give a unique vehicle if the design.
I also like that answer.
It didn't make a whole lot of sense, but...
No, I also like that answer because, to me, that is also the Defender. The Defender has a lot of compromises to get it to where it is. So that could bode well for the new Defender. Maybe there will be some compromises that we may or may not like, but at least it'll give it some distinctiveness and character.
I think that was also a good shot at a good opportunity for him to take a shot at the really the fallibility of the Defender itself, because it's not a perfect vehicle. It's not even a great vehicle by most standards in terms of functionality. He's right.
No.
You know, it's the seating position's cramped. I mean, you know,
it was ahead of its time for 1948, but
yeah.
That's about it.
Wind and water come through the bulkhead vents. You know, I mean, there's the rear windows rattle on the station wagons. They're far from perfect, but people forgive all of that because of, you know, it's authentic and it's
because
charming
they are so distinctive.
Yep. So yeah, perfection doesn't have to be perfect. You know, it can be found elsewhere. Which
perfection
I think
is
one
overrated.
of the later questions. Yeah, it really is. Perfection's boring.
Perfection is overrated. Excellence is underappreciated.
I think this is a good segue then to the next question. So let's hear that. Then the question is, how much family resemblance is too much for its own good?
I think our vehicles are very distinctive, are very singularly minded compared to what I see out there generally. Because when I go out there, I see a lot of cars that don't know what they are. A lot of brands that don't know what their DNA is.
Yeah.
And actually, Discovery is completely different to a Range Rover. But again, they're all Land Rovers, so there are certain things. But if you look at a Discovery, it's got the step roof, it's a full 7-seat. You know, it doesn't have a continuous belt line like a Range Rover does. It has certain features that differentiate it. So I sometimes think those observations, I say to people, why don't you look at the car properly?
Yeah.
You know, because it's easy to write down, I think, oh, they're too similar. Sorry, you know, but pay the respect to the designers, the experts.
Okay, this is why I called this one out.
Here's where I want to argue with the guy.
So he says, look at the Discovery, it's got a stepped roofline. No, it doesn't. It's like, I think, 3 millimeters in stepped roof.
See, that's my argument. It's there, but if you have to get up right next to it with a measuring tool to see that it's there, it's not there. You can tell from across a parking lot that one of the new vehicles is made by Land Rover, but you can't tell whether it's a Disco or a Range Rover until you get up close. That, to me, is not distinction.
A bit of tunnel vision on his part, that he spends so much time focusing on the little details that they seem a lot bigger to him than they are to the rest of us.
Right, but we don't matter. Jerry says they're different, therefore they are different. God has decreed.
I think that stepped roof line is probably because I suspect there's probably some internal discussion, and he's like, fine, I'll give it a stepped roof line, and then he'll tell you that it's there when it really, to me, isn't there.
I think there's certainly part of it that is probably the case. I think another part of it is, again, the technological side, specifically aerodynamics to attain certain fuel efficiency standards, that some of those features just have to change. You can't have a significant stepped roof without changing the aerodynamics. I give you that,
but okay, sure. He's making a compromise because he has to, but has he kept the distinctiveness like he talked about in the previous question? I'm willing to compromise if it's still distinctive. Well, it's not distinctive.
Right.
And it's not really there when you tell me that it's there, and it's not really there. And when I first saw the new Disco came out, and I'm like, well, where's the stepped roof line? And then it was in the marketing materials. It said, oh, by the way, it has a stepped roof line. Where? You know, and then he tells me,
old one you could spot, and you knew it was a Disco from 300 feet away. You knew what it was. Now you've got to get out a profile gauge to see that stepped roof line.
I'll play devil's advocate here for a second. The original stepped roof line could also be seen as a compromise because it needed more headroom, for the market they were going after, and the only way to get that was to break the 2 rows of seats.
And it was a compromise that made the vehicle distinctive, to use Jerry's words.
It did, but arguably the packaging on the new one probably doesn't dictate a stepped roof line at all. There's probably enough interior, floor to ceiling height to do that without even messing with a stepped roof line.
Sure,
maybe so.
And they've continued it, out of tradition. And likewise, the asymmetry in the rear door. There's zero reason for it, in the new model. And companies have even now come out with centered license plates, just to ironically, to break up the asymmetry on the back hatch. When there were exterior spares and the spare sat off to one side, it made a lot more sense. LR3, LR4 arguably had no reason to have a asymmetric
tailgate
door brake, but they left it there out of tradition, and so they're.
Yeah, I've certainly seen.
They're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't.
Well, yeah, but then don't turn around and say don't say we're going to make distinctive products and there'll be some compromises, and then you have to tell me those things are there when they're not, and then end it by saying pay respect to the designer, to the experts. You're not looking at the vehicle correctly.
Yeah. You're not looking at it correctly.
Well.
That's the part that annoys me.
Well, I think we tend to focus on the face, and the details he was kind of spelling out were body sides and some other more nuanced details that most people probably never really considered in that light. I think that the face of the trucks gets so much attention. And,
I would disagree with you.
I have a problem with the side profile. I don't care about the face as much.
Okay.
I think this crew just looks more at the side profile, maybe the rear and those distinct elements. I think the front facing part has always been kind of a given, and it's there. That's just the way it is. I think that's more the general population. I could be wrong, but that's.
And my view of design is that the face of the vehicle, the nose treatment, if you will. I mean, just going back to when I grew up in this country. Your face treatments were similar within a brand. It was the side profiles where you distinguish one model to the next. So in my opinion, that's what needs to happen here. I'm fine with the noses all looking the same because in my mind they should, but the side profiles should be very different, and they're not. Despite what Jerry says, they're not.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's certainly from my perspective, that to him, those look like large details because he's been focusing on them a lot and trying to make sure that they're integrated into the design in that way.
Right.
But they're still so minor compared to everything else that ultimately we miss those.
They're too hard to see from a distance.
Yeah. But I think that's also, happening in general a lot. In general with vehicles from far away, it's a little hard to tell, partially because of just more generic modern design and also some of the aerodynamic requirements. It's harder to distinguish a lot of the modern vehicles at a distance than it has been in the past.
I don't know. I don't know that I agree with you.
Why don't we end this question with his second response, which would be highly, highly non-controversial.
When Defender comes, that's when you'll see the whole story. And Defender will be polarising in design terms from Range Rover and from Discovery. And at that point, we'll probably be able to pull Discovery a little bit back that way. So there is a logic there.
So the Defender is going to be polarizing. We've heard that before.
That's a real bomb.
He says they're going to pull the Discovery a little bit back that way towards Defender.
Okay. Well, why not start back that way? Why would you wait?
Well, apparently there's a logic, Harold. There is a logic.
Okay.
You don't see the
Jerry
whole
logic.
Vision. You don't see the whole vision, apparently. You're not looking at the cars.
Well, and I'm not looking at it properly because I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, we have had no glimpse into that side of things yet.
That's
still very much in the dark.
And
that's the
to be honest, I'm tired.
We're not seeing the whole family.
And I'm tired of hearing about it, and I'm tired of this argument about this unseen Defender, and I'm tired of hearing that I will like it. Just show us what it is, damn it, and then we can decide for ourselves.
Well, actually,
he said it was going to be polarizing.
Yes, he did say you're going to like it,
and that's fine. Well, and that's fine, but let us decide for ourselves whether we like it or not. I'm tired of hearing, either I'm not going to like it or it's going to be appealing. Let me decide for myself. Show me the stuff.
They have their own vision of things, that, Harold. There's a reason why I think they've taken a break from making the old model, taking 2 or 3 years off to coming out with the new model.
No, I completely get it. It's just I'm tired of the hype, and I'm tired of the speculation, and I'm tired of this discussion, to be honest. I want to get it over with. I want to see the damn thing.
And it certainly has been drawn out for a long time because they introduced the, the
Evoque?
What was it, C100? Yeah.
Oh, wasn't the LR 100?
No,
DC.
DC 100, yeah.
DC, Defender concept.
That was many years ago, and it was not well received. And in the meantime, they were still producing the Land Rover and produced it for almost a full year after it was supposed to be discontinued. And obviously, they've had a whole lot of new vehicles that they've introduced in the meantime. Hopefully, this means that they've spent a lot of time continuing the discussion and back and forth on the Discovery or new Defender concepts and what they're going to do with it.
I suspect that was cart coming before the horse in some way. They probably should have come out with the Evoque and the new Velar and all those things first, then brought out that DC 100 concept, because I don't think people were prepared for the change. I think they
No, I think I was in Frankfurt when that was revealed in 2007. It was or 2000.
Wow, has it been that long?
9, 10. Yeah. Yeah, it's been a while. Original plan really was for continuation of Defender. There was, when I interviewed Jerry for the first time at that show after the DC 100 had come out, and the reaction was swift, to the design. And the time it was revealed and the time I got to interview him, it was pretty obvious that there were some sore points. The DC 100 was not met with the, welcome they were expecting. They really thought that was, a production-ready concept. And if you look, pretty much every concept they've rolled out is wheeled into production as it was shown. They got the message with the DC 100. The original plan, like Morgan said, they produced the existing Defender longer than they originally intended to. And they kind of drew that out. It was more ceremonial than market driven. But the real plan really was to go from old Defender production fairly swiftly into a new version of the Defender. There was never intended to be this kind of gap. Even still, the reveal date for the Defender is still kind of a moving target. In talking to some people inside just this past week, we're not going to see it quite as quickly as we thought we were going to see it. We'll probably still see some official proof of it later in the year, but it's not going to really be in high circulation until next year for sure. So, this is I think they understand just how important this is as a model. This is their icon of the brand. So I think, for as arrogant as it sounds that others aren't going to like it, I think they really do care about getting it right. And that's the reason for the gap, not because they wanted it to go this long.
No. I do agree. I agree with that. I'm saying I guess I didn't say it correctly. Was I think they the design part of it was probably done in the wrong order. I think that design was so changing for the entire brand that coming out with the DC 100, I think first, because it even came out was that before the LRX? Coming out with that was was polarizing and such a radical change in design for everything in Land Rover that had they come out with, let's say, the LRX first and maybe the Defender concept and done those and brought out the Evoque and brought out all those changes. Did I say it right again? I apologize, I got it wrong.
You got it right. You got it right.
And if they had come out with the the new Range Rover and the Velar and then said, oh, by the way, here's a DC 100, I think the public and especially the heritage folks would have been better prepared. I think they putting that cart before the horse.
Maybe, but I think that like what Bryan was saying, I think they expected it to go over better than it did.
Yes, yeah. I agree with that. I do agree.
And I don't think they viewed it as being a big change. I think they just figured it was no big deal. Here it is, and that would sort of draw the attention and get the steam rolling for all the other new products they wanted to do, and it just didn't work out that way.
Yeah, I think they expected it to be received like the FJ Cruiser was for Toyota.
Right, and the problem is they made it look like that.
Yeah, and they left enough of the signature elements out of the DC 100 that there were enough people complaining, as well as just kind of making it look like an FJ Cruiser.
Okay, the final question. This is not the final question, but the last one's kind of pretty short, but this is a long answer. I think it was a great question. I told Bryan that, and I think even McGovern told you it was a great question. And this question and this clip will last a few minutes. Can a vehicle's perfection lie in its imperfection?
We have to be careful that with Defender, while I respect our traditionalists, people that love Defender, we have to be careful we're not preoccupied with designing a vehicle for them, because to be honest, they love the Defender they've got and they'll probably die with it. You know, they'll never change it. Yeah. They probably won't buy the new one.
Sure.
There'll be other people that will. The new vehicle has to be relevant in a world that's changed massively from when those original cars were created.
Yeah.
It needs to be relevant, it needs to technologically be of its time, it needs to have, you know, all the connectivity, the technical aspects that a fully up-to-date vehicle should have, and it's also going to be made in a state-of-the-art assembly plant.
Sure.
So to create those imperfections would not be the right thing to do. I think what the new one has to do is maybe replicate the charm and the essence of the original, and that's more around its capability, its durability, its ruggedness. Mm-hmm. And we have to be careful that we're not preoccupied with. We certainly should not try and do a retrospective vehicle or a modern day facsimile of what's gone before.
Sure.
So we shouldn't be doing the mini thing or some of the other things that we see. I think people will be quite surprised when they see it. I think a lot of people will, even the traditionalists, will smile.
Good.
But it has to be modern, and it has to be of its time, and it has to be able to do what it says it can do on the tin.
Good deal. And one last question, throw it in.
They have to think about it this way. I haven't fucked up yet. I'm not going to do it now. Certainly not on the Defender.
I actually like that answer, except for the very end. I'm
not sure I agree with him on the end, but okay.
Yes, that's my point. I agree with everything up until the end. I think he's right. They do have to be careful, and they has to be of its time, and it's got to be modern, and it has to include the things that the market is looking for now. And I do agree with all that.
On the other hand, when he says he shouldn't be doing the mini thing has worked well for Mini.
Right. An interesting point.
That would have probably been a better analogy if he'd said the PT Cruiser thing.
Well, yeah, right. That was a cool car for a couple of years, and then it was dated. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's what he's looking to avoid, is that we just do something that feels like a Defender, for the sake of nostalgia, and then in 5 years it's obsolete as a marketable vehicle.
Right.
Which actually would be good for the market, though. And then you have to come up with a new one, because you got to.
Yeah, but the problem is people have to still love it enough to want to buy another one. And I think if you do what we're talking about, in a lame retrospective, people will in 5 years, when it isn't relevant anymore, people will know that and decide, I'm not playing that game again.
Although he did say, us traditionalists or heritage folks we're not going to buy the new one. And what's your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe not when it's new, but
right.
I mean, I view all of us as being the people that are going to buy them. We're the second and third owners. We're the future second and third owners of the Defender, which matters to the people who are buying it the first time, because they're going to want to know there's a good resale market for these things a few years down the road.
Well, I think some of the new buyers may not necessarily think that far ahead. Certainly an existing Land Rover owner might, if they say, I know somebody who will buy this off of me in a few years.
But see, that factors into every premium brand. Resale value. I mean, there's whole books on it.
It's true, but I think...
And that affects the price of the lease. It matters.
It does, but I don't think that as many of the actual customers take that into consideration, even though it factors into price, lease value, and some of the other factors there. But I do think that if there's a chance that we get a smile out of it, if there's some nod to the original Defender, and if they really do truly focus on the capabilities, durability, and ruggedness, then it still could be a modern Defender in that way, right? Because then it will actually still live up to its heritage in being the vehicle that gets passed down and keeps getting used for years to come.
Right, and even if we don't buy it, we're still the ambassadors of the brand, if you will. We're still out there hyping it and talking it up.
Yep.
I mean, we talk a lot about the new Range Rovers and the new Evoque and the Velar, and are we going to own one of those? Probably not. But we're talking about it, and we're promoting it to those who would.
Right.
But that, I would say, Harold, that is the new Land Rover.
You're probably right.
Yeah, and that's, while we may talk about them, we don't own them, we don't use them for for what we think they should be used for. And I think
right. So our opinion still matters because we are promoters of this new brand.
Absolutely. The point there is that that Land Rover has changed and it is going in a new direction. And Jerry has communicated that and is communicating that. He has said we're not going to buy the new thing, whatever that is, but he does want us to come along with him on where things are going. He also says, and this is something I like to discuss a bit, is he does say, again, I like this answer, this whole general answer. It makes me feel better about what the new truck might be, generally speaking. And he says, the new Defender has to maybe replicate the charm and the essence of the original. And that's around capability, durability, and ruggedness. So that makes me feel a little better. I wonder what he thinks charm is, and I wonder.
Well, that's just it. I mean, I like the answer, except I'm not trusting that he really understands the charm and the essence of the original.
As we said early on in the segment, yes. Does he actually get it, or does the people on his staff get it, and how much? Do they, and of course you have to wonder how much they can help him to find that information. I guess actually maybe
how much would he listen to them if they gave it to him?
He's had a strong hand on the Range Rover and the Range Rover family. Do we know how much hand he's had in the Defender family? I would say suggest less because there's a step roof line and there's an asymmetrical door. So how much hand has he had in
You mean the Discovery, not the Defender.
My apologies, the Discovery. And
okay.
Yes, and then so do we know how much he's had in the Defender?
I think the important thing to realize is he's not putting pen to paper, to tablet these days as a design chief. He's kind of directing what his actual designers will come up with. And internally, I mean, the thing we sometimes simplify is that Jerry designed these cars. Jerry didn't design any of these cars. They were designed under his direction. And internally, for each design, there's generally an internal competition. Several designers compete for the winning design, both inside and out, and that's pretty common in the business these days. So they don't just say, Bob, you're designing the new Discovery, and it's got to have a step roof line and seat 7, and it has to have all these elements. Go for it. I met the guy who was responsible for the Discovery 5 exterior design, and I apologize, I don't recall his name off the top of my head, but he said there were more traditional, conventional Discovery designs that were brought forward that had presumably vertical taillights and more pronounced roof lines and things like that definitely would have felt like a Discovery 4 continuation. And Jerry effectively rejected them, said they weren't progressive enough. This is a model that's going to be with us for the next 8 to 10 years. And it still needs to look fresh as it's running out the end of its model run. And while those designs were evocative of older models, they weren't progressive enough to take it forward for the next several years.
They didn't reflect his vision of what a Discovery should be.
Well, they didn't reflect the realities of the marketplace 10 years from now or 8 years from now, when that thing's still got to be selling.
He sees it.
He sees it, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's his vision.
Keep in mind there's legislative changes coming. They have to look way down the road at a lot of factors other than just does it look like what we've always sold. Right. But arguably, you come back to his discussion about the utility alone not being as much of a sales factor as just styling up against other vehicles in the marketplace that are slicker, smoother, more luxurious looking and feeling. And, that's where the market's at right now. Jerry he's got his hands on every one of those projects, but he's not sitting at the drafting board cutting out outlines or anything.
No, he sets the tone, and he, of course, has to approve. Yep. Yeah, he sets the tone. He outlines the vision, then he has to approve whatever they come up with. So in that sense, he does design it, but no, he doesn't do the nuts and bolts.
Well,
there's always several designs, and then it's board approval. So Jerry makes the case for the one that he feels is worthy of bringing into production. But ultimately, it's a board decision, which I think is why we don't have a DC-100 in production right now.
Well, thank God for that.
Maybe that could be a good sign. Could be a good sign.
Yeah, thank God for the fact that Jerry doesn't have a complete blank check.
He is doing this in collaboration with engineering, Harold. Haven't you heard that?
Oh, yeah. Engineering is equal.
Engineering
sure.
is equal.
Well, and all of the entire management board.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the board and all the managers at the plants.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, ultimately, he has to sell it to the board, and that's the checks and balance to the whole deal. So he's not a complete dictator.
The interesting thing about the earlier part of that answer, he was talking about the designing in the imperfections and things like that, and he expanded a little more on it during the conversation, talking about how the Defender riveted body panels and waves down the door panels and all that. That's
those were unintended features.
With the tools they had. Right, and that's what he said. We have to be careful not to just go back and make it charming in that regard.
No, you can't create that. That's something that just happens by accident, and you don't.
Yep.
That was never designed in, but on the other hand, that is what makes a Defender a Defender. It's very, very unique, and if you've ever restored one, you understand that, because you can't just swap a new panel on and expect the rivets to be in the same place. Sorry, those were done by hand and on a whim.
Well, and I think that's the philosophical part of the discussion about Defender is, does it need to look like a Defender? Does it need to act like a Defender? God, I hope they don't need to be constructed like one. They can't, but
well, they can't do that. That's why they're not still doing it. If they could do it, they would still be doing it.
They
Exactly.
Still, the Heritage line is still up. You can go. There's a little mini thing you can tour. They still got the guys. No, they can't.
But I think for them
internally,
though, it's when you define Defender, is it the ability to get in and count on getting just about anywhere, or is it that silhouette, or is it a combination? It's probably a combination.
I think it's a combination.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly needs to get you stuck in a place that only another Land Rover can get you out of. That's requirement number one.
Well, he did end with, I haven't fucked up yet, and I certainly am not going to do it with a Defender. I hope that's true, and I hope these checks and balances that are in the system will come to bear.
Depends how you define him fucking up, but anyway.
Well,
but the fact that he doesn't want to start, as he perceives it, with a Defender means at least he's committed to doing it right.
Right, for sure.
And if there's any of the designers are listening, I hope a good heritage design succeeded and you convinced McGovern to take that design and go forth. Can confirm that we have 2 listeners inside of the factory, but maybe there's a designer listening. You can secretly reach out to me and let me know, yes, a designer is listening to the show. Along the lines of the design and what McGovern is designing, I did actually have a thought. I was putting this together when he mentioned something earlier about electric cars are coming. I actually think McGovern would do very well designing an electric car fresh, without any preconceived notions of anything, because I think that is an all-electric car is the perfect example of what a vehicle, and I put that in quotes, should be like when you throw everything out the window. And I think electric cars do that because they don't have...
Well, and Jerry is great at dispensing with preconceived notions, so I think you're right in that regard. And in his answer about that, it's he makes a really good point. If you don't have an engine to box anymore, why do you need to have a bonnet?
Yeah, exactly.
Why do you need that big box on the front? Because there's no engine there anymore.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Other than you need a place for the batteries, or you need a trunk for your groceries. But you have a lot more latitude in terms of what the package looks like because you don't have these big components.
I sense genuine concern about the ability to stand out as a brand, and once some of those limitations are removed. Especially the driverless cars where you're hopping on a seat, for lack of a better understanding. What is it that brings people to that brand? And there's deeper conversations about sharing and not owning vehicles and things like that as well, that the whole industry to a degree, because how are you unique now if there's no driver experience? There's none of these styling concerns to work around packaging. How do you really differentiate? And so we've got interesting times ahead of us, that's for sure.
Well, the interesting thing is he's talking about this. My mind instantly goes to Judge Dredd.
Mine too.
That futuristic vehicle they built on an FC-101.
Welcome to Johnny Cab.
Yeah, well, there's Johnny Cab too, but the Judge Dredd Forward Control 101, basically, that they They painted it bright yellow, and they left the green oval prominently displayed, and it was fabulous. But I mean, that's an example of what it can still look really cool, but yet be futuristic.
Yeah, we could probably look to something like airlines for differentiation in terms of brand experience. Because for most people, getting on a plane and going somewhere, you just need it as a service. But when you get up into first class and international business travel and things, there's some big differentiators between airlines, from seat comfort to, the accommodations around you and things like that. And that's probably, for now at least, the best analogy I can think of.
And the thing about that, too, is a 737 is a 737 no matter what. So it's all about what you offer in the experience that makes you different.
Yeah, and that's why I earlier brought up some of the differentiations on the interior, specifically of the Velar and the new Discovery 5, that may help push people in that direction in terms of Land Rover vehicles.
I certainly agree. Interesting times, but we didn't even touch on, will you be able to drive, and how does that affect manufacturing and the future of all brands, really? There's the generation that does not drive, does not learn how to drive, has been born, and they will, if they're not going to learn how to drive, then they won't enjoy that, and there's no need for them to go to buy a car, any car, whether it's an Oldsmobile Cutlass or a Jetta or a Land Rover. It's not going to matter, and they don't care. That will then, of course, inform car design too, because then do you really care if this goes to your point about the airlines? Do you care if you're behind a Land Rover, or do you care if you're behind a Cadillac? It's not going to matter.
No, I think you really have to be a driver to care what you're in. But to clarify your point, John, I think the generation that doesn't know how to drive was born 50 years ago. The generation that doesn't care and doesn't want to learn has been born recently.
We may start comparing driverless vehicles more with the way airlines work, but also the other aspect of it is that certainly with companies like Amazon, we really truly come into the point where people don't even necessarily need to travel to get most of what they need. Transportation is even less of an issue in general.
Right.
Yeah. And then you think about a brand like Land Rover that is one of its selling points is the ability to drive anywhere in any conditions. Now you take drivers out of it and you have autonomous vehicles that only drive on roads and approved conditions, and where again is the unique selling point of Land Rover. If these things are never going to go off-road because they're not programmed to do that.
Right.
Well, at some point, the Land Rover becomes a recreational vehicle, not transportation.
I think the other possibility is, certainly we're seeing a lot more push towards driverless vehicles, but in reality, they're quite a bit further away. They're discovering that to do driverless vehicles correctly, it actually requires a whole lot of computer processing power, which means a lot of energy. Obviously, there's the whole infrastructure side of things. Some people like to drive, but a lot of this is probably going to get pushed out further. And then the other side of this is that we're still seeing that there's a lot of variability in terms of just natural weather throughout the year. We can't necessarily just rely solely on driverless vehicles, and there's a lot of portions of the country where it's not feasible to expect to have well-maintained roads or to have roads, and those are still going to need to be accessible. And it may be that Land Rover maintains its heritage of having been some of the first vehicles to explore various areas. Maybe they end up being some of the last vehicles that are still handling off-road. I mean, that would be awesome.
That's pretty deep.
I like that list. That was good.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of shoes to a certain extent. I mean, tennis shoes and stuff. I mean, there was a time when people ran because they had to get somewhere in a hurry. Now they do it for fun. And to me, that's where I think Land Rover is going to eventually head. It becomes much more of a recreational commodity than we have to get there commodity.
I think that's all cars, Harold. It really is.
That's true. But I think the Land Rover, like to touch on what Morgan says, is in a position to be much more into that recreational segment because of the the go anywhere type thing.
Yeah. But then there's Jeep is lining up for that.
Sure.
Toyota to some degree, although they seem to have kind of they push the FJ away. Yeah.
Right. Well, Jeep is there, and that's fine. But I'm just saying Land Rover's in a position to capitalize on that segment.
Maybe this will also spur a return to the original series trucks period, they'll become even more desirable because they will be disconnected from the modern autonomous vehicle.
Because they're off grid. The preppers will love them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or you can in fact get on the road. Oh, there's a bunch of potholes. Okay, let's go. Yeah, you can
no roads, no problem.
You can only go 30 miles an hour. That's okay.
And we're actually already starting to see that, certainly with Land Rover opening their own special vehicles operations, for classic Land Rovers, Range Rovers, all of those. But in general, the market for older SUVs, even newer ones than Land Rovers, even, looking at 80s and 90s SUVs, the market has skyrocketed of late as people realize, oh, these are really capable, really simple vehicles, and they don't have all these extra bells and whistles that go wrong.
Well, there's also a big push now by the market for SUVs, period. Sedans, regular cars, are not selling. Everyone wants an SUV. Everyone's selling an SUV, and I think that's also helped to raise the market of the older vehicles also, and kept some of those prices high on the used cars because there is such a big demand now for quote-unquote an SUV, whatever that may mean to you. And then you have Ford wanting to bring out the Bronco again. They're going to have a new Bronco. Is that going to be the Bronco 3? I'm not sure what the name will be, but they're coming out with that in a year or two.
Yeah, and on some of the later model SUVs that are becoming more popular, some of it is a lifestyle thing, and then some of it is, specialty market that people are tapping into nostalgia, making a pretty good profit on it. I mean, some of the Icon vehicles are probably prime examples of vehicles where they're taking older four-wheel drive vehicles and upgrading them with much more modern powertrains and features internally, and then people are spending a lot of money on those.
The Glendenwagen? There's a good example of a company that has a lot of money, and they can keep an old heritage vehicle continue to run, modernize it as much as they have to for regulatory purposes, and they can throw money at it. And that's what to me the G-Wagon is. They put a roll cage over on the outside of it.
It doesn't hurt that the G-Wagon, they actually outsource that. Built by Steyr, the people who brought you the Pinzgauer, which is far more badass than the G-Wagon ever could be.
Yes, and the other side of that is that the G-Wagon is still very much a global market vehicle, is extremely popular in, some of the oil-producing nations, which are very wealthy, and so those just fit in well. So
Not to mention police and military.
Police and military still have a strong usage of them, yes, absolutely.
More importantly, as old as it seems right now, it was developed, in 78 or 79 was when it debuted. So,
true.
Its construction method is much more modern than series Defenders.
They got to see all the stuff we did that worked or didn't work, and then they were able to put their spin on it and put their German engineering to it.
Yeah, well, I think, the bulkhead construction as a construction method was certainly a cost factor in the end of Defender. And you don't have that with the G-Wagon. You have a full-body monocoque.
Most everybody else gave up on that technology back in 1927. So
yeah. And so, things like crash, energy transfer, and things like that all comes into play, just that basic design difference in the way they're constructed. The G-Wagon's a damn near thoroughly modern vehicle by 1948 standards.
Yeah, it's really much more akin to the Range Rover Classic than the Land Rover, even though it's got the slightly boxier design similar to the Defender.
Yeah, it's a little more like a Discovery in my mind. You got the tall profile body and vertical lines. And
step to roof?
No step to roof.
Oh, okay. Whatever you tell me, I'll believe. So the final question that Bryan had for Jerry McGovern, and how long did you get with him, by the way, Bryan? How long total time?
I was looking at it was supposed to be a half hour. I looked at the interview time. It was the recording was 37 minutes. He was pretty generous with his time, and it was the end of the day. He was actually feeling quite relaxed. It's the best interview I've had with him yet, best discussion I've had with him yet.
So this final question, it's a more general question. I think you asked some good questions, by the way. In the time you had, Bryan, you were able to bring some new information out, and actually asked him a couple questions that he hadn't thought about before. So I think that was kudos to you.
Well, thank you.
And thanks for joining us, too, and allowing us to have this deep discussion. All right, so the final question here. As a designer, what would you find is the ultimate expression of luxury?
And ultimately, as a designer, The ability to make people happy is the ultimate. And I don't know, I can't remember, I've spoken so long to Dave, I've told you that design truly has the ability to enrich people's lives. And with all of these, luxury products or services, whether it's...
Again, I agree with Jerry. I do agree with McGovern on that one. I think it does, a good design does can make people happy. Look at the original Defender.
Well, I mean,
Absolutely.
Good design, quality, all those superlatives make people's lives better. Reliability.
Do you feel your life is enriched, Harold?
Better question is, do you think your life is enriched?
I guess it depends how you define enriched, right?
Well, I mean, if I'm making Land Rover ownership possible for you, then I am enriching your life.
Correct. I would say that I do agree with his general statement that design does enrich people's lives, and I think my life
I
feels
definitely
enriched.
agree with that too.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Specifically, certainly Land Rovers have enriched my life and allows me to talk about them for 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon.
Well, yeah, that's maybe the less desirable part of that. Land Rovers as a whole, I think, make the world a better place. They certainly made it more accessible.
I would just, going back to, his statement about good design improving people's lives. You look at something like a Lada or a Trabant, the old Eastern Bloc cars that were really just commodities. People
or
were
a
happy to have
Yugo.
them. A Yugo, exactly. Those were designed to accommodate a need at a price point, lowest common denominator. They're quirky, and they're loved now for their quirkiness and for the fact that they came from a certain era. But people didn't really love those vehicles in the same way that they love a well-designed, product like a Land Rover.
Yeah. There's an old joke where a Yugo owner walks into a car parts store and says, "Do you have a lug nut for a Yugo?" And the guy at the counter says, "Yeah, that sounds like a fair trade."
Although there have been a number of missteps in the design side, even in the Western world, the Pontiac Transport was really a piss poor design, and that was not loved, even still is not loved.
Yeah.
For all my vehicle's faults, I'm still happy that every day I walk out and see a Land Rover in the driveway and not some boring transportation appliance.
Exactly right. Life is too short to drive boring cars.
Well, I think on that note, that will bring us to a conclusion of our deep dive into the Jerry McGovern interview with Alloy and Grits, Bryan Joslin. And Bryan, thanks for joining us. Thanks for providing us with the audio so we can actually hear Jerry McGovern himself. I think that was actually also insightful. Thanks for...
Yeah, it adds a nice dimension to it, definitely.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Did you use any questions? You had asked for questions before you went to the auto show. Did you use any of those, or did they inform any of your questions?
I didn't really. I wrote the question list on the plane on my way out there, so I wanted to throw at him some
on the back of an envelope.
Yeah, pretty much.
Very Lincoln-esque.
Yeah, I did want to throw some things at him that he probably wasn't going to get that day, because I realized I had a late day interview and that he was going to probably get a lot of questions from business journals and things, and a lot of enthusiasts, traditional automotive media, asking him about Defender, which I tried to not beat him up exclusively on Defender, and so I think
he's probably tired of talking about it.
Exactly. So I think I threw him some curveballs, and I think in the end he really actually appreciated that. He had to put some thought into it late in the day. I think it's one of the reasons he was a little more relaxed and a little more engaging than I've ever experienced him.
You said he leafed through the Alloy and Grit magazine. Did he have anything else to say about the magazine?
I get the sense he doesn't spend a lot of time with car magazines in general. Mm-hmm. I'd shared it with him so he'd be familiar and see that we'd kind of do things a little bit differently if he was familiar with the British magazines. Yeah, he was rather impressed. He thumbed through it, really liked, as a designer, he appreciated what we were going after and felt that, it was a great emotional compliment to the brand. There's some of that in the very early part of the recording where he's actually just kind of shuffling through and making comments, on the magazine as we're doing the small talk in the beginning there. So that was kind of nice. Your
magazine does make a much bigger visual statement than some of the others. that are more about the content and the information, whereas yours is, much higher quality in terms of like the photographs and the paper and that sort of thing.
The layout.
Well, we appreciate that, and we figure that's our unique selling point. You can get information pretty much anywhere these days. We didn't design it to be strictly and informative. We wanted it to be a little more emotional connection, for people who appreciate them.
I would go so far as to say it enriches people's lives.
Oh, wonderful way to close.
Yes, thank you. I didn't even plan it that way.
Maybe our show title, It Enriches People's Lives.
If you wish to read the full interview with Jerry McGovern, check out the spring issue of Alloy and Grit. It is available on North American newsstands. Is that right?
That is correct. It's at Barnes & Noble and available through alloyandgrit.com.
And if you've not already subscribed, please do. Bryan and his team do a fantastic, excellent job with that magazine. It really is a cool magazine. I look forward to seeing it every month. Not every month, excuse me, when it comes out. What is that? I want to say
quarterly.
Quarterly.
Yeah, quarterly.
There we go. Yes, I know it just shows up, and it's a good day. So thanks very much again, Bryan, for joining us. Hopefully you'll be back on the show soon.
Sounds great.
I hope you enjoyed that deep dive discussion with Bryan Joslin about the Jerry McGovern interview and find it interesting. We wanted to do that because things we've been talking about for a while, we thought it was a good opportunity to hear, right from Jerry himself. You get to hear his voice and you got to hear his answers, and then we want to discuss them in detail. Tell us what you think. Be interested to hear that. Maybe we'll read some comments about it in future episodes. Thanks to Pax for our production support, as always, making us, I think, sound much better and fixing the audio like he did with the Jerry McGovern audio. Helped out a lot. Thanks to Mike for coming on the show again. Thanks very much, Mike.
Always happy to be here.
And where do folks find you, and why would they find you?
Come on by justbritish.com, your source for all the good British car news, both contemporary and heritage.
Ooh, nice. You can update your tagline now. You have a good source for events, by the way. If you want to know some sort of British event, not necessarily strictly Land Rover, but go out and check out justbritish.com. Mike also tweets and those events. And I just found out there was a British event in Erie, Pennsylvania. I did not know.
They are. Yeah, we try to be sort of the definitive source for events all over, at least the U.S. and internationally too, but really cover the U.S. events. So there's a good extensive calendar.
And thanks to Morgan with SeriesParts.com.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here as always. And, my site is definitely the source for heritage-only products.
You don't do contemporary series trucks?
No contemporary. That's not true. You can get some contemporary add-ons and modifications, but that's it. The vehicle itself is still heritage.
And thanks to Harold for joining us. Thank you, Harold.
Yeah, well, $10 is $10.
The 110, if you get a chance to see it, is spectacular. Thank you, Harold. It is absolutely spectacular.
That one I won't say is $10.
No, it is not. It is not by any stretch.
Far from it.
Far from it. And thanks to Bryan Joslin for joining us on the show and today from, back in February, really. Thanks to Alloy and Grit for being part of our Wilkes Toast giveaway. As part of us celebrating the 70th anniversary of Land Rover, we're having a giveaway. We would ask you to post a photo, a short video of yourself toasting the Wilkes brothers on Instagram. Be sure to tag it with Wilkes Toast LR70 and the Centresteer podcast and Alloy and Grit magazine. You may get yourself an Alloy and Grit subscription or a prize package of SNX 891 stuff from the podcast itself. Contest will run, or giveaway will run, through September 7th of 2018. Visit our website, Centresteer.com, to listen to previous shows and for show notes, which have links to stories discussed in today's show and also giveaway details. We're part of the 4x4 Radio Network, and I invite you to check out the 4x4 related shows at 4x4radionetwork.com. Apparently, Dan Cole of the 4x4 Radio podcast is moving to California from Alaska. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can directly support the show at patreon.com/Centresteer. If you're not a subscriber to the show, please do so you get the show automatically in your podcast listening device application. Patreon subscribers get early access to updates from the Bells. We weren't able to connect with the Bells with them in May. Hopefully we'll do so in June. I think they're headed back to Germany, so chances are better that will connect with them. A month after the expedition entries are posted, they become available to everyone to listen to. So head on over to patreon.com/Centresteer to listen to special updates from the Bells as they travel the planet, continuously travel the planet. Contemporary travel the planet? No. Okay.
Contemporarily travel.
Contemporary planet, travel the planet in a heritage Land Rover.
Classically.
Thank you for listening to show number 62. I hope you enjoyed it.
Is it a bespoke Land Rover?
Bespoke.
It is now.
That's true. It's a bespoke heritage classic Land Rover.
Which they are contemporarily using.
Contemporarily using a contemporary setting.
In a bespoke manner.
Thank you for listening to show 62, and I hope you enjoyed it. Apparently, we were having a good time today. We enjoyed it. We'd love to hear from you and what you're up to in your Land Rover. Until next time, I ask you to share the show with another Land Rover enthusiast. A wave as we pass by.
That's pretty deep.
I like that was. That was good.